Chapter 1. The 90th Morning. For 90 mornings, I woke at 6 o'clock on the worst day of my life. Nobody else knew. That was the loneliest part. The same gray light. The same text from Alex at 6:02. Big day, we've got this. The same coffee I would never finish. By 6 that evening, the shareholders would vote. The gavel would fall. My mentor's life's work would belong to a man who made his fortune taking things apart, and the world would go white. Then it would be 6 in the morning again, and I would be the only person alive who remembered that all of it had already happened, 90 times. For 90 mornings, I tried to save the company. I tried everything a person can try. It fell every single time by 6 o'clock, like a law of physics. On the 91st morning, I stopped trying to save it, and I started asking a different question. Who, inside these walls, had opened the gate? But I am getting ahead of myself, and I have learned, if I have learned anything, that the morning does not forgive getting ahead of yourself. So let me tell it in order. Let me tell it the way it kept happening. The light came first. It always came first. 6 a.m. in October, and the sky over the town was the color of an unpolished lens, that flat pewter gray that isn't quite dark and isn't quite morning. The light I had come to know the way a prisoner knows the stain on his ceiling. I could have told you where the water tower cut its silhouette against it, which street lamp down on Halden Row would still be burning because the sensor was broken, how the frost would sit on the lot in a thin skin the first cars would break by 7:15. I knew all of it before I opened my eyes, because I had already seen this exact morning 90 times, and the sky never once did anything different. I lay there and I did not move. That was new, the not moving. On the early loops, I had bolted upright, heart going like a struck bell, certain that this time it would be tomorrow, that the calendar would let me out. It never did. So I had learned to lie still and take inventory. Same ceiling, same ache behind the eyes that no sleep touched, because it wasn't that kind of tired. Same weight on my chest that had a name, and the name was the day itself. Then, at 6:02 exactly, my phone lit the nightstand. I didn't need to read it. Big day, we've got this. D. Alex. My oldest friend, my right hand, the co-COO who had stood beside me at Arthur's funeral and held my elbow when my knees went. Every morning that little rectangle of light, that "we've got this," arriving 2 minutes after I woke like a heartbeat the day couldn't skip. I want that on the record, that for a long time, that text was the one kind thing in the machine, and I clung to it. I texted back what I always texted back because I had tested, over many mornings, what happened if I didn't. And the answer was that it changed nothing and cost me something I couldn't name. Ready. See you at the office. 3 dots. Then his reply, always the same. A thumbs up and a coffee cup. The small grammar of a friendship 20 years deep. I set the phone down and lay in the pewter light and let myself, for exactly the length of one breath, believe it. Then I got up, because the day did not wait, and I had things to grade. Let me explain the grading, because it is the closest thing I have to a religion now. Somewhere around the 20th morning, I can't be sure, the early ones blur, I understood that if I was going to be sentenced to live one day forever, I was at least going to learn it, the way you learn a piece of music, note by note, until you could play it in the dark. And the first thing 90 repetitions burns into you until it stops being an opinion and becomes bone is this. You find out who someone really is when you've watched them make the same choice 100 times, and they never once make it differently. People think character is what someone does under pressure. It isn't quite. Under pressure, people surprise you once. What they are is what they do when the pressure is identical, and the stakes are identical, and the room is identical, morning after morning, and they reach every time for the same lever. I had a whole building of them, and I had graded every soul in it. I kept the ledger nowhere but in my head, because there was nowhere else it could survive the reset, and I ran down it every morning while I dressed, the way another woman might say a rosary. Zola Mensa, my executive assistant, who would arrive at 7:40 with 2 coffees because she always bought a spare for whoever needs it, and who, on the loop where I fell apart in front of her, had not asked a single prying question, only moved her chair closer. Pass. Ethan Caldwell, head of engineering, Arthur's other protege, who at 9:15 in every version of this day would stand up in the strategy meeting and say the same unglamorous, decent thing. That the people on the factory floor deserve to hear the truth before the market did, and be ignored, and say it anyway. Pass. Marcus Finch, the CFO, cold as a bank vault, whom I'd spent a dozen mornings suspecting and finally cleared, ruthless in the open, which is its own strange kind of honest. Evelyn Chase, the board chair, who would flinch and flinch and flinch. Leonard Stone, general counsel, careful to the point of cowardice. And Sachi Tanaka. I need to be honest about Sachi, because this account is, in the end, an apology to her. And you should hear the shape of the crime before you hear me repent it. Sachi Tanaka was a junior analyst, 26, 3 years out of school, with the kind of raw integrity the corporate world files down within a decade if you let it. Every morning, and I mean every single one, she came to me at 8:50 with a folder. In it was a discrepancy she'd found in the acquisition financing, a thread that, pulled, suggested Corvid Capital's numbers didn't sit right, that the man buying us had leverage he shouldn't, doors open that shouldn't be. She came to me because I was the one person in that building she trusted to do something with it. Her hands shook a little every time. She was frightened, and she came anyway. Pass. God, pass, in letters of fire. And every morning for a long time I used her. That is the ugliest sentence I know how to write, and I am going to leave it standing. I took Sachi's folder and Sachi's courage and turned her into a weapon against the takeover. I put her forward as the whistleblower, sent her up the chain and out into the light with her discrepancy because it was the sharpest tool I had. And every single time, by 4 in the afternoon, the machine found her, named her the leak, walked her out through the lobby with a box while the real rot sat untouched in an office 2 doors from mine. Every morning I spent her. Every morning it didn't even work. And every morning the world went white at 6 and gave her back to me, whole and brave and shaking at 8:50. And I spent her again. I told myself it was triage, one analyst's career against thousands of livelihoods, arithmetic even Finch would approve. The one thing I never let myself say was that I had become, in the service of saving Arthur's company, a person who had a name for what she did to Sachi Tanaka, and the name was acceptable losses. 90 mornings will strip the varnish off you. You have all the time in the world and no time at all. And in that airless forever, you see yourself with a clarity that is close to unbearable. I finished dressing. I took the pocket watch from the top drawer, where I placed it every night and where it waited for me every morning, and I held it in my palm the way you'd hold something warm, though it was never warm. It was Arthur's. Arthur Sterling built Halden Instruments out of a rented garage and 40 years of stubbornness, precision instruments for laboratories and hospitals. Quiet machines that measure the things other people's lives depend on. He built it in this town on purpose, in a valley that had nothing else, and grew it until it was the town, until half the families on Halden Row had someone on the floor or in the labs. His motto, engraved on a plaque in the atrium, said so often it became a kind of throat clearing, was this: a company is just people who decided to trust each other on purpose. He built a whole life out of believing that, and a year ago, he died believing I had stopped. The watch was a repeater, gold, worn to a soft shine at the edges by his thumb over 50 years. It had stopped at 6 o'clock. I don't know which 6, the morning or the evening. And I have decided the not knowing is the point. And no one ever wound it after him, and now it lived in my drawer, frozen. Every loop it stayed frozen, because the reset put everything back exactly as it was. And the watch was already stopped, so the loop had nothing to reset. It was the one object in my whole world that was as stuck as I was. Some mornings that felt like company. Most mornings it felt like a verdict. I never reconciled with him. I have to say that plainly, too. In the last year of his life, I was climbing and he was slowing, and I mistook his caution for fear and his patience for weakness, and I pushed, for the expansion, for the outside capital, toward the very kind of open door a man like Malcolm Frost walks through. We fought the week before his heart stopped, in his office, and I said things sharpened for maximum damage because I was young enough to think winning an argument was the same as being right. Then he was gone, and I was the COO of everything he'd made, and I never got to take it back. That's the wound. That's the thing under all of this, the thing the loop kept pressing its thumb into, morning after morning, though it took me an obscene number of them to feel it. I put the watch in my pocket over my heart. And I went to work in the dark. The office at 6:40 in the morning is a specific silence. The building, glass and steel, Arthur's one concession to vanity, a headquarters that looked like the instruments it made, hummed. The HVAC, the servers 2 floors down, the emergency lights that never went off, all of it blending into a single low note under the empty corridors. I'd spent so many mornings alone in that hum that I'd started to think of it as the sound the loop made. The sound of a day holding its breath before it did the same thing it always did. I went to my office. I did not turn on the main lights. I poured a coffee from the machine Zola kept stocked and carried it to the window, and I watched the town come gray-blue out of the dark, the water tower, the broken street lamp, the frost skin on the lot. And I did not drink the coffee. I never drank it. 90 mornings and it went cold on the sill every time, because drinking it felt like agreeing that the morning was ordinary, and I would not agree. It was the smallest possible rebellion, the only one that never cost anyone but me. Unfinished coffee. My private flag, planted in a day that would not end. Here is what I knew was coming, because I had watched it come 90 times. At 7:14, somewhere in the building or on the road or wherever he was, a certain thing would happen that I could feel, but had not yet learned to see. A hinge in the day, a moment when the air seemed to change pressure, though I could never catch it, could never place it. It sat in my knowledge like a missing tooth I kept probing with my tongue. Something happened at 7:14. 90 mornings and I couldn't tell you what. It nagged me. Hold that. It matters more than anything else in this account. And I want you to feel, the way I felt it, how long I looked straight at the answer without seeing it. At 7:40, Zola would arrive with 2 coffees. At 8:50, Sachi and her folder. At 9:15, Ethan and his decent, doomed sentence. At 11:40, and you could set an instrument by it, the rain would start. Not a minute before, not a minute after. A gray autumn rain that sheeted the glass and turned the town to a watercolor and fell, unbroken, through everything that followed, as if the sky had its own ledger and had graded the day fail before it began. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, a document would be delivered that I had never managed to stop. And at 6 o'clock in the evening in the boardroom on the top floor, the shareholders would vote. The takeover would close. The man from Corvid Capital would rise with a smile like a closing drawer, and the world would go white. Malcolm Frost. 90 mornings of him have left me with less of a portrait than a weather system. He is a corporate raider, he'd hate the word, and it's the only honest one. The principal of a fund called Corvid Capital, and his business is buying companies worth more disassembled than whole, and then disassembling them. He'd found us the way a crow finds a wounded thing, patiently, from high up, certain. Halden Instruments, in the year after Arthur's death, with a grieving deputy at the helm and a boardroom that confused motion with courage, we were, to a man like that, simply undervalued parts in the temporary shape of a company. He meant to buy us, strip us, and salt the valley. The town would follow the way towns do, quietly, in for sale signs and shuttered diners. And he was going to win because he always won, because I had watched him win 90 times. He had a line. I'd heard it across enough loops to know it was rehearsed. One of those phrases men like him buff smooth and deploy like a card. Every fortress falls from the inside. He said it with relish, in that boardroom, at the end, every time, and every time it landed on me like a stone, because it was true, and I couldn't understand why. We had defenses. Arthur's lawyers had built them, poison pills, provisions, a whole architecture so that no one could take the company without the board's throat under their boot. And every morning those defenses came apart in Frost's hands like wet paper, cleanly, at exactly the moments he needed, as if he had the blueprints, as if someone had handed him the keys. Every fortress falls from the inside. I fought the wolf. Understand that before you judge how long this took me. I fought with everything Arthur left me. I called shareholders. Over 90 mornings I'd called all of them, learned their voices, their weaknesses, their prices. I lawyered. I leaked. I went to the press and the regulators. On one desperate morning, I stood up in the boardroom and simply told the whole truth, wept it if I'm honest, and watched Evelyn Chase look at her hands and the vote go through anyway at 6 o'clock, and the world go white, and 6 a.m. return. I tried to buy the swing shareholder. I tried on one very dark morning near the 60th to do nothing at all, to stay home and let it fall without me, to see if my absence changed the physics. It did not. The company fell on schedule whether I was in the room or in my kitchen. It fell like a law. 90 mornings, 90 times the gavel, 90 white flashes. And here is the loneliness of it, the part I could never make anyone understand because there was no one to try. Everyone forgets. I'm the only one who has to remember. Every evening the whole building's memory was wiped clean, and every morning they arrived new minted and hopeful. Alex with his "We've got this," Zola with her spare coffee, Ethan with his sentence, Sachi with her folder and her shaking hands. All of them innocent of the 90 funerals I'd already attended for the thing we all loved. I was the only mourner at a death that hadn't happened yet, and had already happened 100 times. You cannot imagine what that does to the inside of a person. I'm not sure I can either, and I lived it. I stood at the window with my cold coffee and watched the first cars break the frost skin on the lot, and I felt the exhaustion the way you feel a fever, not as tiredness, but as a change in the temperature of everything. Not sleepy. Tired the way a rope is tired, right before the last fiber. 90 mornings of losing had worn me down to something I didn't recognize. A woman who graded her friends like laboratory samples and spent a brave young analyst like pocket change and called it triage. I looked at my reflection in the glass, faint over the gray town, and I thought, if this is what saving the company costs me, I am not sure the woman doing the saving is worth the company. And then, the 91st morning taking its first breath, Sachi came in early. She wasn't supposed to. In 90 loops, she came at 8:50, never before. But this morning, this one, she knocked on my half-dark doorway at 6:55 with the folder held to her chest like something that might get away, and her face was gray as the light, and she said, "Ms. Harding, I know it's early. I couldn't sleep. I think someone's going to say it was me. When this comes out, I think they're going to say the leak was me." She swallowed. "I just wanted someone to know it wasn't. Before. In case." And the loop, which I thought I had memorized down to the last atom, did something it had never done in 90 mornings. It changed. I stood there with Arthur's dead watch over my heart and Sachi Tanaka's frightened face in my doorway, and the rain still 45 minutes from falling. And something in me that had been asking the wrong question for 90 mornings finally went quiet. And in the quiet, a different question stood up. I had been asking, how do I save the company? 90 times. Never differently. I had watched myself make the same choice 100 times, save the building, spend the people, and never once make it differently. And I had had the gall to grade others by that measure. The refrain I lived by was an indictment, and I'd been reading it as a creed. The company fell every evening no matter what I did. That was a law. But the way it fell, cleanly, from the inside, defenses parting like a gate swung open by a hand that knew the latch, that was not weather. That was a person. Fortresses do not fall from the inside by themselves. Somebody, inside these walls, had decided to stop being one of the people who trusted each other on purpose. Somebody had opened the gate, and whoever it was had been doing it at the same minute, in the same way, every morning, right in front of me, 90 times, which meant the one weapon I had, the terrible gift of this endless day, the ability to watch a person make the same choice 100 times until I knew exactly who they were, was pointed the wrong way. I'd been aiming it at the wolf outside. "Sachi," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I'd felt in 90 mornings. "It wasn't you. I know it wasn't you. And this time, I hadn't planned the words. They arrived like the rain, on schedule, from somewhere that had been waiting. This time I'm going to prove it." She didn't understand. How could she? It was her first version of this morning. It was my 91st. But something in how I said it made her shoulders come down half an inch, and she nodded and left the folder on my desk and went to find coffee, alive and whole and, for once, not yet spent. I looked at the clock. 6:58. In 16 minutes, the thing I could never see would happen again at 7:14. The hinge, the missing tooth, the pressure change I'd felt 90 times and never caught. This time, I was going to catch it. This time, I would not spend the day fighting the man at the gate. This time, I was going to stand very still inside my own building and watch, really watch, with 90 mornings of patience behind my eyes, to see whose hand was on the latch. For 90 mornings, I tried to save the company. It fell by 6 o'clock every time. On the 91st, I stopped trying to save it and started asking who, inside these walls, had opened the gate. Chapter 2. Pass/fail. The elevator doors opened onto the 41st floor at 6:41, and I could have walked it blind. I had. Somewhere around the 60th morning, I'd tried it as a test, eyes shut from the lobby, counting the seams in the carpet with the soles of my shoes, one hand trailing the cold rail outside the boardroom, and I'd arrived at my office door without missing a step. The building didn't change. Only I did. That was the thing no one understood because no one else could. Halden woke up new every day. I woke up old. 90 times old. I set my coffee on the corner of the desk where I always set it. In the ring it had left on the wood in 100 mornings I was the only one who could see, and I took the watch out of my pocket. Arthur's watch. Brass gone soft gold at the edges from 40 years of his thumb. The hands stopped clean at 6. They were always stopped at 6. I had stopped believing that was a coincidence around the 30th loop, and stopped being frightened of it around the 50th. Now it was just true. The way the rain at 11:40 was true. The way the vote closing at 6 in the evening was true. A law of physics with my mentor's initials engraved on the back. I put it down beside the coffee and I opened my ledger. Not paper. There was no point in paper. Paper reset with everything else, went blank at the white flash and came back innocent. My ledger lived in the only place the loop couldn't wipe. My head. 90 mornings will teach you a building. It will also teach you the people in it, down to the marrow. In a way, an ordinary life never can. Because an ordinary life only shows you a person once. You watch someone make a choice, and you tell yourself you know them. You don't. You know them the day you've watched them make the same choice 100 times, and they never once make it differently. That's when the grade stops being a guess. So I graded them. Pass. Fail. A ledger nobody could read, kept on a day nobody but me remembered. 6:47. Sachi Tanaka came in through the fire stairs, not the elevator because she always came in through the fire stairs. 9 floors on foot, every morning, because she said the elevator made her think too hard about being watched, and Sachi had never once figured out that thinking about being watched was the smartest instinct in the whole company. She was 26, junior analyst, third desk from the window in the pit downstairs, except on this particular morning, she wasn't at her desk, she was up on 41, hovering at the mouth of the corridor with a manila folder held against her chest like a breastplate, waiting to catch me before the day swallowed me. I knew what was in the folder. I'd read it 89 times. Ms. Harding, same breath, half caught. I know today's bid. I know it's the vote. I know the timing is terrible. But I found something in the Corvid filings, in the footnotes, the special purpose entities they're routing the offer through, and the numbers don't bid. They can't be doing what they say they're doing with the assets, not legally. And I think if the board saw it... Sit down, Sachi. She sat. She always sat, in the chair angled toward the window, and she always set the folder on her knees and squared its edges with both thumbs. And she always looked at me like I was a door that might open. Here is what I want you to understand about Sachi Tanaka. She was right. She had been right 89 times. Buried in the footnotes of Malcolm Frost's tender offer was the whole machinery of the lie, the shell entities, the asset stripping dressed up as operational synergies, the plan to gut a company that employed an entire town and sell it off in pieces before the paint dried. A 26-year-old had found it on her own, at night, unpaid for the hours, because she thought the truth was worth finding. That is the rarest thing in any building I have ever worked in. That is integrity that costs you something. Offered before anyone asks, and with no promise of reward. Pass. Sachi Tanaka. Pass. The highest mark in the book. 90 mornings running. And I had spent it. Every single time. Because for 90 mornings, my only question had been, how do I win? And Sachi's folder was a weapon. And I used it the way you use a weapon. I sent her forward. I walked her research into the boardroom, or handed it to a regulator, or leaked it to a reporter who ran a story at 2 o'clock that moved nothing. And every single time the machine did the same thing to her that machines do to the person holding the smoking evidence. It made her the leak. By 6 o'clock she was the disgruntled junior, the source of the breach, escorted out with a cardboard box while the men who'd actually sold the place shook their heads about loyalty. I watched it happen. I watched it happen so many times I could recite the sentence Evelyn Chase used to end her. We can't have loose cannons in a moment that requires discipline. The way you recite a prayer you no longer believe. I told myself it was necessary. I told myself she reset at 6 and forgot, so it didn't count. It counted. Some mornings I woke up and the first thing I felt, before the gray light, before the coffee, was her face when she understood I'd let them do it. "Leave it with me," I said. Same words I'd been saying all week that wasn't a week. "I'll read it tonight." There was no tonight. There never was. But she stood, and she smiled the careful smile of a person who has decided to trust someone on purpose, and she went back down 9 flights of stairs. I put the folder in my drawer where it would vanish at 6 and be back on her knees at dawn, unspent. Not today, I thought, and didn't yet know what I meant by it. 7:02. Alex. He came in the way he'd come in for 20 years, which was loudly and warmly, and with 2 coffees, one for him and one he set in front of me without a word because he'd stopped believing I'd finish mine sometime around 2006 and had never once stopped bringing it. Alexander Reed, co-COO, my right hand, my oldest friend, the person in that building I would have trusted with the last light in the world. "Big day," he said. "We've got this." He'd said it every morning. It buzzed in as a text at 6:02 before he ever reached the floor. "Big day, we've got this." And then he said it again in person at 7, with his hand landing warm on my shoulder. And for 89 mornings it had been the one thing in the loop that felt like a rope thrown across water. Alex remembered nothing, like all of them. But Alex was the one whose forgetting hurt, because he was the one whose steadiness I kept reaching for and kept finding gone. Every morning I got my oldest friend back new, and every evening I lost the whole day with him, and he never knew we'd had it. I looked at him standing there in the gray light, grinning, sure, generous, and I graded everyone in that building but him. It didn't even occur to me to open the page. You don't audit the ground you're standing on. "We've got this," I said back, and meant it the way you mean a lie you love. He squeezed my shoulder and went to prep the floor. I want it on the record, my record, the one nobody can read, that on the 90th morning I did not suspect Alex Cole of anything but caring too much. That is how good the trick was. That is how long it takes. Now, the suspects. If someone was letting the wolf in, and by that morning I hadn't yet let myself finish that sentence, but it was crouched at the back of my skull like a draft under a door, it would be someone with keys, someone with access to the defenses, the proxy machinery, the board's own hand. In a company this size, that was a short list, and I had spent no small part of 90 mornings watching the 3 names on it. Marcus Finch, Chief Financial Officer. If you were casting a traitor, you'd cast Finch, gray suit, grayer manner, a man who spoke in basis points and had never once in my hearing said a sentence you'd remember at a funeral. He ran the numbers like a man handling something cold and dead, and he made no secret that he thought Arthur's whole enterprise had been run on sentiment where it should have been run on math. On the surface, he was exactly the man who'd sell you for a premium. But I had watched Marcus Finch for 90 mornings, and here is what 90 mornings gave me that a single day never could. I saw what he did when he thought no one who mattered was watching. And what Marcus Finch did, every morning at 9:20, was call the head of the pension division and run the numbers on the town, on the retirees, the machinists, the people whose livelihoods rode on this. And every morning he came out of that call with his jaw set harder, because the Corvid deal was going to cut them, and he hated a cut he couldn't justify. He was ruthless. He was also, on this, clean. A cold man is not the same as a false one. Finch was a wall, not a door. Pass. Reluctantly. Underlined twice, because I doubted him longest. Evelyn Chase, board chair. Ambition with a good haircut. Evelyn cared about how the deal would look on her, the graceful chairwoman who'd shepherded a proud old firm into a new chapter, the profile in the trade press, the seat on 2 more boards it would buy her. She would not fight for Halden Instruments because fighting was undignified and losing gracefully photographed better. She was the one who'd end Saatchi every time with that line about loose cannons. For a good stretch of loops I'd wanted her to be it, because she was so easy to want to punish. But I'd watched her too, and betrayal takes a spine, and Evelyn didn't have one to sell. What she had was cowardice, which looks like collaboration but isn't the same crime. She wasn't opening the gate. She was just standing beside it with her eyes politely closed so no one could say she'd seen. Complicit, yes. The mole? No. Fail, but a soft fail, the kind you give a coward, not a Judas. I filed her under wouldn't stop it rather than made it happen. Leonard Stone, general counsel. The lawyer. He had the keys to everything, the poison pill mechanics, the proxy process, the exact seams in the company's defenses that a raider would need to know to slip a knife into. If anyone had the technical means to open the gate cleanly, it was Leonard. He'd argued 3 loops running that the defenses were probably unenforceable anyway, which is precisely what a traitor would say to talk you out of using them. Except I'd sat behind Leonard Stone at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on more mornings than I could stand, watching him fight, actually fight, red-faced, on the phone with outside counsel, hunting for one clause, one filing, one Hail Mary to stall the vote past 6. He never found it. There wasn't one. I'd looked harder than he had, across more days than he'd ever have. But he looked. A man burning his own afternoon on a fight he thinks he's losing is not a man who already sold the ending. Pass. 3 names, 3 grades, 2 passes, 1 soft fail. And a cold little space opening under all of it where a thought was trying to stand up, and I kept pushing it back down because I did not have room in 90 mornings of grief for the shape it was making. Instead, I did what I did every morning to remind myself of the one thing the loop couldn't take. I proved I owned the day. Zola Mensa came in at 7:30 with the printed agenda she always brought, because Zola did not trust screens for anything that mattered, and Zola was the sharpest person on that floor and the only one starting, just starting, at the very edges to look at me sideways. The 9 o'clock in boardroom B, I said, before she'd set the pages down. Evelyn will open by thanking everyone for coming in early on a hard day. Then she'll say the word stewardship. Frost's people will be on the line, not in the room. He never comes in the morning. He likes to arrive after the ground's been softened. Finch will ask about the pension exposure, and Evelyn will call it a detail for the working group. And Leonard will say the defenses are, quote, a matter we should be clear-eyed about. And then Evelyn will look at me and say the company needs to approach today with clarity and not... I paused, because I like this part, God help me. Not with sentiment. That's the word she'll use for me. Sentiment. Watch. Zola's pen stopped over the paper. She looked at me for a long, careful moment, the way you look at a card trick when you've started to suspect it isn't a trick. You've read the pre-brief, she said. It wasn't quite a question. There was no pre-brief. There was never a pre-brief. Evelyn didn't circulate one. I was reciting a room that hadn't happened yet from a morning that had happened 89 times. Something like that, I said. Come sit in. Tell me at the end how close I was. Everyone forgets. I'm the only one who has to remember. Most mornings that was the loneliest sentence in the world. Some mornings, the small, mean, alive ones, it was the only power I had, and I let myself hold it like a coal. 9 o'clock, boardroom B. Evelyn thanked everyone for coming in early on a hard day. She said, stewardship. The Corvid line crackled on speaker. No Frost, just his people. His second, a smooth man named Santos who could make a hostile takeover sound like a wellness retreat. Finch asked about pension exposure. Evelyn called it a detail for the working group. Leonard said we should be clear-eyed about the defenses. I felt Zola, 2 seats down, go very still, and I did not look at her. Because if I'd looked at her, I'd have smiled. And you do not smile in that room. Then Evelyn turned to me. I already had my hands folded. Lena, she said gently, the way you're gentle with something that's about to be put down, I know how much this place means to you. It means a great deal to all of us. But I think today we owe the shareholders clarity, a clean, rational look at a fair offer. Not a small, kind, unbearable pause. Not sentiment. There it was, word for word. Ethan Caldwell, down at the far end of the table, glanced up sharply. He'd caught something in my face, the flat non-surprise of a person watching a play she wrote. But everyone else just nodded along to the eulogy Evelyn was delivering over my objections before I'd even raised them. And then they did the thing. The thing I'd sat through so many times I could have mouthed it. They talked around me, not to me, around me. Santos on the line laid out the value certainty of the offer. Evelyn praised the orderly process. Leonard noted the limited legal runway. And every time I started to speak, every time I said the word corvid, or asset stripping, or the town, the temperature of the room dropped a degree, and someone said something soothing about emotion, and the sentence I was trying to build got taken apart at the joints and handed back to me as feelings. Lena has a long history with the founder, Evelyn told the speakerphone, as if I'd left the room. As if grief were a disqualifying condition. As if the woman who knew more about what Malcolm Frost was actually going to do to this company than any person alive on any of their timelines was the one at the table who couldn't be trusted to think. I let it happen. That's the part I'm not proud of and won't hide. I had learned over 90 mornings that fighting them at 9 o'clock changed nothing about 6 o'clock. So I sat there and took the humiliation the way you take a familiar weather. The sentimental obstacle. The founder's widow of the boardroom, mourning a man and a company both, in the way of the clean, rational deal. Ethan kept looking at me. Zola kept not writing. And underneath the humiliation, cold and clear, I did the only work that mattered. I watched. Because here is what 90 mornings finally forced me to see, sitting in that room being talked over like furniture. This deal was too clean. Malcolm Frost. I'd studied him the way you study a weather system that keeps drowning your town. I'd never once beaten him. He was 3 moves ahead of every move I made, every morning, in a way that stopped feeling like brilliance and started feeling like cheating somewhere around the 40th loop. He had a line he used in every profile, the thing he said to journalists like a man laying down a favorite card. Every fortress falls from the inside. Reporters loved it. They thought it was swagger. They thought it meant markets, leverage, the inevitability of the strong. I'd spent 90 mornings reading it as a boast. Sitting in boardroom B, watching a proud old company get walked to the edge by its own board while a Raiders second purred on a speakerphone, I finally read it as a fact. A confession, even. He wasn't predicting that fortresses fall. He was telling you how he made them fall. From the inside. With a key someone handed him. Because none of it worked otherwise. I knew Halden's defenses cold. I'd probed every one of them across 90 desperate afternoons. On paper, they should have cost Frost weeks, months, a war. Poison pills, staggered timing, the swing shareholder who could have gone either way. On paper, this takeover should not close in a single day. And yet it closed. Every single day. By 6 o'clock. Like a law of physics. Laws of physics don't cut corners. Cheaters do. The vote closed too fast. The proxies fell into line too neatly. Somewhere between the defenses I knew were there and the loss I watched arrive at 6 every evening, a step was missing. A step that only worked if someone on the inside had already unlocked the thing Frost shouldn't have been able to reach. A forged hand. A leaked defense. A gate opened from within, on a schedule. I had been fighting the wolf. For 90 mornings I had thrown myself at the wolf. The tender offer, the raider, the market, the vote, and lost to it every single time, and called it his strength, his genius, his 3 moves ahead. But a wolf that always comes in through the same door isn't smart. It's just been given a key. The 9 o'clock ended the way it always ended, with Evelyn thanking us all for our candor, and the Corvid line clicking dead, and the room emptying out around me while I sat there. Ethan hung back, one hand on the door, and looked at me like he was about to ask a question neither of us had time for. Zola walked me out and, in the corridor, quietly, without quite meeting my eye, said, "You said that whole meeting before it happened, word for word. Evelyn's line about sentiment, all of it." A beat. How? "I'll tell you," I said. "Not today." Because there was no today. But the fact that I wanted to tell her that after 90 mornings alone I'd found one person starting to see the shape of what I carried landed in my chest like the first warm thing in a long winter. I went back to my office. The coffee was cold in its ring. Arthur's watch lay where I'd left it, hands stopped at 6, patient as ever. I picked it up and turned it over and read the initials worn soft under my thumb, and I thought about a man who used to say a company was just people who decided to trust each other on purpose, and about the ledger in my head, the passes and the fails, and the one page I had never once let myself open. 3 names with the access. I'd cleared Finch, I'd cleared Leonard, Evelyn didn't have the spine. And a 4th name I hadn't written down at all, because it had never occurred to me to grade the ground I stood on. The person who brought me 2 coffees, The person who texted, "Big day, we've got this," at 6:02 every morning of a world only I remembered. The one door in that whole building I had never thought to check because I'd been leaning against it for 20 years. I sat down slowly, the cold coffee at my elbow, the stopped watch in my hand. Frost wasn't winning. Someone was letting him in. 90 mornings, and I'd been so busy fighting the wolf, I never asked who unlocked the door. Chapter 3. Walter's Watch. The pocket watch weighed almost nothing, and I had carried it long enough to know that nothing could weigh that much. I sat in the dark of my office with it flat in my palm, the way I had sat some fraction of 90 mornings, turning it toward the gray light that came in low over the parking lot and the shuttered diner and the whole small town that did not yet know its day had already ended. The watch was a Halden. Of course it was. Arthur had made the first movement himself, back when the company still fit inside a rented machine shop with a leaking roof, and he had carried it for 40 years, and it had kept better time than most of the people he trusted it around. Now it kept no time at all. The hands stood at 6 o'clock, straight up and straight down, a clean and stupid line, and they had stood there since the morning the loop began. I used to think that was a coincidence. I had stopped thinking that around the 40th morning. 6 o'clock was where the day started and where it ate itself. The watch had simply agreed to stop where my life had. Let me tell you about Arthur Sterling, because you cannot understand what I was doing in that chair, in that dark, on the 91st identical dawn of my life, unless you understand the man whose name was on the building and whose watch was in my hand, and whose forgiveness I would never get, because I had run out the clock on that too. He was not a soft man. People decided he was, later, at the memorial, when they needed him to have been, and I let them, because it was a kinder lie than the truth, and the truth belonged to me. The truth was that Arthur Sterling was hard as a lathe bit and twice as exact, and he built a company the way he built a movement, every piece tolerance checked, every fit deliberate, nothing in the assembly that hadn't earned its place. Halden Instruments made the machines that other machines were measured against, calibration standards, precision optics for the medical scanners in half the hospitals in the country, the little sealed reference cells that told a lab, down in some basement 3 states away, whether the thing keeping a patient alive was reading true. You have never heard of us. That was the point. Arthur used to say the best instrument in the world is the one nobody notices, because it never lies to you and never asks for credit. He might as well have been describing the life he wanted, and mostly got, and I helped take from him at the end without ever meaning to. The town was the company, and the company was the town. That is not a figure of speech. It is a payroll. 1,100 people on the floor and in the offices, and behind them the diner and the hardware store, and the 2 churches, and the school levy that passed because Halden Instruments made its quiet quarterly gift the way Arthur breathed. When people talk about a company town, they usually mean something grim, a fist closed around a place. Arthur's was the opposite. He held the town open with both hands. He knew the names. He knew whose kid had made state in the 400-meter and whose wife had gone through chemo the winter the optics line lost a contract, and he kept them all on anyway, ate the loss, and told the board it was an investment in a thing the board could not put on a spreadsheet. He was usually right about the things you could not put on a spreadsheet. That was the trouble with him, from the board's point of view. That was the only trouble with him. He found me when I was 26 and furious and too smart for the job I had and not smart enough to hide it. I was a line supervisor with a chip on my shoulder the size of a pallet, and I told him, to his face, in a plant meeting, in front of 40 people, that his changeover procedure was costing him a shift a week, and he was too sentimental about the old way to see it. I thought he'd fire me. He found me at my station an hour later, and he stood there with his hands in his pockets and looked at the machine and not at me, and he said, "You're right about the changeover. You were wrong about why." And then he taught me the why, which was that 3 of those slow steps existed because a woman named Sophia had lost 2 fingers on that line in 1988, and Arthur had rebuilt the sequence around never letting it happen again, and he'd rather run slow forever than fast once at that price. He could have made the line faster. He chose not to. He made the same choice every quarter for 30 years and never once made it differently, and it took me half my life to understand that this was not weakness. It was the whole of him. You find out who someone really is when you've watched them make the same choice 100 times, and they never once make it differently. I know that better than anyone now. I have made a study of it that God did not intend a person to be able to make. He raised me up. There is no gentler word for it and no more accurate one. He put me on projects I wasn't ready for and stood behind me while I earned my way to ready. He sent me to the operations rotation, the finance rotation, the year in the European plants. He made me his chief operating officer at 41 over 2 men who had waited longer and hated me cleanly for it forever after. He told me, the day he did it, I'm not giving you the company. Nobody gives anybody a company. I'm giving you the room, and the room is full of people. And your whole job, the only job, is to keep it the kind of room they'd choose to be in. I nodded like I understood. I understood the org chart. I did not understand the room. It would take me 90 mornings of watching it be sold to understand the room. And here is the part I have to say plainly, because I have spent 90 mornings not saying it, and it has cost me every one of them. I pushed him out. Not with my hands. With something worse. With being right, relentlessly, publicly, in the exact way he had once forgiven in a 26-year-old and could not forgive in a 43-year-old wearing his own title. The company was struggling. The optics market had turned. The medical division needed capital we didn't have, and I had spreadsheets. God, I had beautiful spreadsheets. And every one of them said the same thing. Arthur's way was too slow, too soft, too generous by half, and the board agreed with me because I made it easy to agree with me. I led the argument that he should step back to chairman. I framed it as honoring him. I told myself it was mercy. I was climbing, and he was the last thing between me and the top of the wall, and I told myself a story where moving him aside was the responsible thing, the adult thing, the thing the room needed. I was so sure I was saving the company that I never once asked whether I was gutting the reason it was worth saving. He didn't fight it. That was the thing that should have warned me. Arthur, who fought the board over a chemo winter and a school levy and a slow line for Sophia's fingers, did not fight me at all. He signed the papers and he shook my hand, and his hand was cold, and he said, "You'll learn the difference between the company and the room. I hope you learn it in time." And then he went home to the house at the edge of town. And 11 weeks later, his heart stopped in the night, alone, with the reading lamp still on, and I found out by a phone call at 5:52 in the morning, and I have hated 6 o'clock ever since. We never spoke again. Not once, not really. There had been 100 chances, a past office, a company picnic, a Christmas card I drafted and didn't send. I kept thinking there was time. That is the oldest lie a busy person tells, and I told it fluently. I thought there was time to be sorry later, once I'd proven I was right, once the numbers turned and I could go to him and say, "See, it worked, and now we can be what we were." I was going to earn my way back to him the way he'd taught me to earn everything else. But you cannot earn your way back to a dead man. There is no rotation for that. The account simply closes, and the balance is whatever it was, and yours reads, "Never said it." His watch stopped at 6. I have to believe he'd have found that funny. So, the loop. Let me make it vivid for you because I have lived inside it long enough that I forget it needs explaining, the way you forget to explain water to a fish. Every morning I wake at 6 o'clock on the day of the shareholder vote. The same gray light, the same coffee I pour and never finish. At 6:02 the phone buzzes with the same text from Alex. "Big day, we've got this." And I have read those 4 words so many times they've stopped being language and become weather. At 11:40, it starts to rain. Not near 11:40. At 11:40, to the minute, every time, because it is the same 11:40, the same rain, falling on the same town, which does not know. At 6 o'clock in the evening, the shareholders vote, and the vote goes the same way it has always gone. And Malcolm Frost's fund takes the thing Arthur spent 40 years building, and I spent one betrayal helping to weaken. And the instant the deal closes, the world goes white. Not dark, white. A clean, silent flash like the inside of a bulb. And then it is 6 in the morning again, and I am the only living thing that remembers any of it happened. No one dies. I keep having to say that to myself because it feels like a death. 90 of them, but nobody dies. It's worse than that. Nothing changes, and nobody but me even gets to grieve it. I tried everything a person can try. I want that on the record, whatever the record is, wherever it goes. I tried the numbers first because I am a numbers person, and I thought the day was a problem and problems have solutions. I built a defense. I found a poison pill in the corporate charter. an old provision Arthur's lawyers had drafted decades ago, and I triggered it, flooded the market with rights, made the company too expensive to swallow. Frost swallowed it anyway. He knew about the pill before I did. He always knew. The next loop I went to the swing shareholder, the retirement fund that held the votes that mattered. And I made my case, and I made it well, and I lost by the same margin at 6 o'clock. The loop after that, I went to the regulators with what I thought was a conflict of interest, and the filing died in an inbox that would not open before nightfall. I tried leaking Frost's real plan, the strip and flip, the assets sold for parts, the 1,100 jobs he'd already mentally spent, to a reporter, and the story didn't clear the desk before 6. I tried buying time. There is no buying time. Time is the one thing the loop keeps all of, and gives me none of. I tried, God help me, going to Arthur's grave, on the 12th or 13th morning, driving out in the gray with the vote hanging over me, standing in the wet grass and asking a stone to tell me what he'd do. The stone did what stones do. I got back in the car and the rain started at 11:40, and I lost at 6. And every one of those mornings, this is the part I built the dark and the silence to finally look at. Every single one of those mornings, I used Sachi Tanaka. I need to be exact about this because I have been anything but, and being inexact about it is the closest thing to a sin I have left. Sachi Tanaka is 28. She is a junior analyst 2 rungs down from where anyone notices, and she is the best natural instrument I have ever seen come through those doors, better than I was, and she does not know it yet. She has a way of pulling a thread in a data set and not letting go, gently, politely, right off the edge of a cliff nobody wanted found. 9 mornings out of 10, she is the one who first spots the anomaly in the proxy tabulations, the thing that shouldn't add up, the votes that arrive in the wrong shape. And every loop, when I needed a lever against the takeover, I reached for her. I sent her digging. I put her name on the memo. I made her the whistleblower because a young idealist with clean hands and a spine makes a beautiful weapon. And because, and here it is, here is the thing, because she volunteered. Every time. I would ask, and she would set her jaw and say the thing she always says. If it's wrong, someone has to say it's wrong. And I would let her, knowing what came next, because I already knew what came next. What came next was that they destroyed her. Every time. The moment she surfaced the anomaly, the machine turned and made her the story, the leak, the disgruntled junior, the unstable girl who couldn't handle the pressure of a real deal. By 4 in the afternoon, her access was cut. By 5, she was walking out with a box. Somewhere between the 90th loop and the counting I lost, I understood that she was not collateral. She was cover. Every loop, framing Sachi as the leak, was the exact move that let the real traitor stay in the shadows. Because if the leak already has a face and a box and a walk of shame, nobody goes looking for the door that was actually unlocked. I had been handing them the scapegoat. I had been handing them Sachi. And then the world would go white, and she'd wake with clean hands and a clear future and no memory, and I'd do it to her again the next morning because I was busy, because I was fighting the wolf, because saving the company was the only shape my hands knew how to make. You find out who someone really is when you've watched them make the same choice 100 times, and they never once make it differently. I had been so proud of that line. I had graded the whole building by it, pass, fail, the ledger I carry that no one else can see, and it had never once occurred to me to point it at myself. But it fit me better than it fit any of them. 90 mornings, the same choice. Save the company, spend the girl. Save the company, spend the girl. Never once differently. If I'd graded myself the way I graded Frost, I'd have written the word I've written under his name 40 times, and it would have been true, and I had earned it. That was the dark I was sitting in with the watch in my hand. Not the takeover. Me. And somewhere in that dark the reframe came, the way the rain comes at 11:40. Not sudden exactly, but inevitable, a thing that had been on its way the whole time. What if the loop was never about the company at all? I turned it over. 90 mornings I had treated the day as a lock, and myself as the person who had to pick it, and I had tried every pick in the set, and the lock had not moved. But what if the day wasn't a lock? What if it was a mirror, and it kept showing me the same reflection every dawn because I kept refusing to look at it? I had assumed the loop wanted me to win. Every fix I built had been a way to win, a better defense, a better lever, a better weapon. and every weapon I built had a girl's name filed off it. What if the morning did not care whether the company was sold? What if the morning had been waiting all this time for me to stop reaching for the weapon? What if the thing that would not let me go was not Frost, or the vote, or even Arthur, but a habit I'd worn so smooth I couldn't feel it anymore? The habit of looking at a room full of people and seeing pieces on a board. Arthur's voice then, clear as if he were standing at the machine again, not looking at me, looking at the work. A company is just people who decided to trust each other on purpose. He said it so often it went in one ear and out the org chart. On purpose, he leaned on that. Not by accident, not by contract, not because a spreadsheet told them to. On purpose. A choice, made and remade. The same choice every morning and never once made differently. Because that is what trust is. It is the discipline of choosing the same people over and over when the numbers give you 100 reasons to choose otherwise. I had spent 90 mornings trying to save the machine, and none of them keeping the room the kind of room they'd choose to be in. I had it backwards. I'd had it backwards for a year. He'd told me I would. I hope you learn it in time. There was no in time anymore. There was only whatever mornings I had left. And Sachi. I finally let myself look straight at her, at the thing about her I'd been managing not to see, because seeing it would have cost me a weapon. She was me. She was me before the wall, before the climb, before the beautiful spreadsheets, before I learned to call ambition responsibility and betrayal mercy. Same jaw. Same refusal to let a wrong thing be right just because it was convenient. Same fatal, luminous willingness to stand up in a room and say, "It's wrong. Someone has to say it's wrong." Arthur had found that in a 26-year-old, and he had not spent it. He had raised it up, protected it, put it behind 3 slow steps so it would never lose a finger to the line. And I had found the same fire in Sachi Tanaka, and I had used it for kindling. 90 times. She was young Lena reborn, handed back to me clean every dawn. And every dawn I did to her exactly what I swore, standing in that wet grass, that I'd become the kind of person who never would. Arthur raised me. I was spending her. The mirror had been sitting 2 rungs down the org chart the whole time, and I'd been too busy fighting the wolf to see my own face in it. 6 o'clock, straight up and straight down. The watch didn't tick. Outside, the gray was going the pale color it went before the town woke, and in a few minutes the first cars would turn into the lot carrying 1,100 people who trusted each other on purpose and did not know that by evening it would all belong to a man who trusted no one and called it clarity. I closed my hand around the watch until the winding stem bit into my palm. I had spent 90 mornings asking how to save the company. It was the wrong question, and the morning had known it was the wrong question and had kept me here, patient as a stone, until I was tired enough and honest enough to ask a better one. Not how do I win? Who am I refusing to lose? And under that, colder and clearer, the thing that finally cut through. Someone had done this on purpose. Someone in that room Arthur built, that room of people who chose each other every morning, had chosen otherwise, had unlocked the door and let the wolf walk in, and then stood by, 90 mornings running, while a girl with clean hands took the blame for it and walked out with a box. I did not know yet who. I thought I did. I was wrong about that too, but I didn't know it yet. What I knew, sitting there as the light came up and the first engine turned in off the road, was that I was done building weapons out of Sachi Tanaka, and I was done grading everyone in the building but myself, and I was done pretending the loop was a lock when it had always been a mirror. Arthur didn't build a company. He built a room full of people who trusted each other on purpose, and someone in that room had sold the rest. He wasn't getting away with it, not on any morning I had left. Chapter 4. Corvid. A raider's plan is a piece of clockwork, and I had spent 40 mornings taking it apart with my fingernails. I knew that now. On the first dozen mornings I had thought Malcolm Frost was a storm, something weather-shaped and formless, a pressure system that rolled over Halden instruments and flattened it by 6 o'clock, no matter what I braced against the door. Storms you cannot fight. You can only survive them, and I had not been surviving. But a storm doesn't do the same thing twice. Frost did. He did exactly the same thing, in exactly the same order, every single day. And a thing that repeats is not weather. It is a machine. and a machine can be reverse engineered by anyone patient enough to watch it run 100 times. I had that patience. It was, by then, the only thing I had in abundance. So I stopped trying to stop him and started trying to draw him. Some mornings I did nothing at all but follow the shape of his day like a hand following a wall in the dark. I let the company fall so I could see precisely how it fell, which board, which nail, which minute. You learn more from a controlled collapse than from a rescue you botch. Arthur used to say, "You can't fix an instrument you refuse to take apart." And I had finally taken the whole day apart, gear by gear, and laid the pieces out on the workbench of my memory where nobody could disturb them but me. By the 40th morning, I could have drawn Frost's takeover on a whiteboard blind. It went like this. Move 1, before dawn, the poison pill. Halden had a shareholder rights plan Leonard Stone had drafted years back, a defense that would trigger the instant any raider crossed 19%, flooding the market with cheap new shares and diluting the attacker into irrelevance. It was a good pill. It should have worked. It never worked because Frost always knew, to the decimal, exactly where the trigger sat and exactly how the board would vote to waive it. Knowledge he could not have had honestly because those numbers lived behind a wall only a handful of us could see. Every morning before most of the building had its coffee, that wall had already been climbed. The poison pill was leaked, not broken. Leaked, handed over, warm, by someone standing inside the room. Move 2, mid-morning, the swing. The vote was never the landslide the Raiders pretended. It came down every single time to one holding, a block of shares parked in a quiet pension trust out of Aldous Grange, 11%, enough to tip the whole thing either direction. The trustee, a careful woman named Eleanor Dubois, arrived at her decision the same way every morning. Undecided at 8, leaning toward Frost by noon, gone to him by 2. She wasn't bought. She was persuaded, fed a story that Halden was a sinking ship captained by sentiment, and the sentiment, in that story, was me. 40 mornings taught me that Eleanor Dubois was not the enemy. She was a woman being lied to on a schedule, and lies on a schedule can be met on a schedule. Move 3, late. The proxy. This was the keystone, and it took me the longest to see because it happened where I never thought to look. At 4 o'clock every afternoon, a courier envelope reached the corporate secretary's desk carrying a block of proxy votes, signed authority from a cluster of smaller holders, enough, stacked on the swing, to close the gap and seal the acquisition. The signatures were flawless. They were also forged. I knew they were forged the way you know a note is off-key without being able to name it. And by the 40th morning, I had proven it to myself 6 different ways. The holders whose names were on that block had, some of them, never signed a proxy in their lives. 2 were estates in probate. 1 had moved abroad and could not have executed the document in the window it claimed. That envelope was the murder weapon. And it did not come from Corvid Capital. It could not have. The authority it forged required credentials that lived inside Halden, the shareholder ledger, the signature specimens, the corporate seal impression. Frost's people did not have those. Someone here did. 3 moves. A leak at dawn, a lie by noon, a forgery at 4. Take away any one of them and the machine seized. And every one of the 3 ran on the same fuel. Inside access. Not muscle, not money. A key. Corvid Capital. I had looked up the name on the 9th morning in an idle hour I have never gotten back, and it had made me colder than I expected. A corvid is a crow. A crow does not build. It watches a thing that others built, and it waits. And when the door opens, it goes in and takes what shines and leaves the rest for the weather. Frost had named his fund after the bird that steals. He thought it was clever. I thought it was the most honest thing about him. He came to the building himself on the day of the vote. He always did. He liked to be in the room when the thing he had circled finally came down. That was the appetite under the tailoring. And so, on the day I am telling you about, call it the 41st, though the number stopped meaning much a long way back, I let him come, and I was waiting for him in a way he had no framework to understand. I want to be precise about what 40 rehearsals do to a scene, because it is the whole trick, and I don't want you to think it was magic. It was not magic. It was homework. When you have watched a man walk into a room 40 times, you stop watching the man and start watching the choreography. You know he will pause a half beat inside the door to let the room register him. You know he will not shake hands first. He will let you extend, then take it a moment late, so the small transaction of greeting is already lost before it begins. You know he will compliment the building, the light. He always says something about the light, as a way of reminding you that he is appraising it. You know which chair he will choose, the one with its back to the window, so you spend the meeting squinting into the glare while his own face stays in shadow. You know he takes his coffee black and leaves it untouched as a discipline, a small performance of a man who needs nothing. And you know his refrain, because he cannot help it, because it is the thesis he has organized his whole life around, and men like Frost always tell you their thesis if you let them talk long enough. Every fortress falls from the inside, he would say. He said it every morning. Somewhere in the meeting, leaning back, unhurried, he would fold it into the conversation like a card he was letting you glimpse on purpose. He believed it the way other men believe in gravity. To him it was not cruelty, it was physics. Walls, to Malcolm Frost, were a fiction the naive paid for. The only real question in any conquest was who inside already wanted to be conquered. And his genius, I will grant him the word, was in finding that person before they had finished finding themselves. He walked in at 9:10, half-beat pause inside the door, the room registering him. Leandra. He let my full name sit there, the way you set down something you intend to pick up later. Kind of you to make the time, on a day like this. You'll want the chair by the window, I said, and I said it before he had chosen it. The glare's better for you from there. That landed a fraction wrong for him, I watched it land, but he was too smooth to show more than a flicker, and he took the chair anyway because to refuse it now would have looked like I'd rattled him. Good. Let him sit where I put him and think it was his idea. That is the whole art of a rigged conversation. You let the other person keep choosing, and you make sure every choice is one you drew first. I know how this looks to you, he said once he'd arranged himself. Sympathy was one of his instruments, he played it well. A man arriving to take something you love apart. But I don't take things apart out of appetite, Leandra. I take apart what was already coming down. Your Mr. Halden built something beautiful and left it defended by nothing but affection. Affection is not a defense. It's a liability with a pension plan. A pause precisely waited. Every fortress falls from the inside. It's not a threat. It's just how it goes. 40 mornings before, that sentence had made me want to put my hand through the window. Now, it was almost tender to hear. The way the last line of a play you've seen too many times is almost tender, because it means the thing is nearly over and you can go home. I did not want to go home. I wanted to take the play apart in front of the man who thought he'd written it. You waved the poison pill at 8:40 this morning, I said. You knew the trigger sat at 19.1 before you walked in the building. You'll spend the late morning on Eleanor Dubois at Aldous Grange. She's undecided now. She'll lean to you by noon, and she'll be yours by 2, because someone has told her again that Halden is a sinking ship and I am the water coming in. And at 4 o'clock, a courier will put a block of proxies on Clara's desk that closes your gap by a hair. I let that sit the way he liked to let things sit. Signed by holders who never signed anything. 2 of them are estates. One of them lives in Lisbon and hasn't executed a document to a U.S. corporation in 3 years. The room went very quiet. Not the board. The board wasn't in the room. This was the small conference off my office. Just the 2 of us and the glare and the cold coffee he would not drink. Just Frost and me, and 40 mornings of homework I could not explain and did not have to. He was good. I'll say it a 3rd time because it's true, and because it made turning him worth the trouble. He did not startle. He set his untouched cup down a centimeter to the left, a man buying himself the width of a heartbeat, and when he looked back up, the sympathy was gone, and something more interesting had replaced it. Attention. Real attention. For 40 mornings I had been furniture to him, an obstacle with a title. Now, for the first time, Malcolm Frost was actually looking at me, the way a crow looks at a thing on the ground that has moved when it should have stayed still. That's a great deal of speculation, he said, dressed as fact. It's not speculation, it's a forecast. I've made it before. True, in a way he could never parse. You're going to tell me next that I've been under strain, that grief does things to the judgment, that I should think about my future, because there's always a place for talent in a well-run operation, and you run a very well-run operation. You'll offer me a soft landing so that when I fight you, I look like a woman who turned down mercy. I watched his mouth, which had begun very slightly to open. Go ahead, say it. I'd like to hear whether I have the wording right. He didn't say it. That was the tell, the silence where the script should have been. He closed his mouth and studied me, and I understood that I had done to him the one thing his entire method was built to do to other people. I had made him feel, for a moment, that someone inside his own plan was standing where he could not see them. He had spent a career finding the person in the room who already wanted to be conquered. It had genuinely never occurred to him to wonder whether there was a person in the room who had already watched him win 40 times and gotten bored. "Who's been talking to you?" he said, flat, not a question anymore. And there it was, the thing I had come into the room to learn, handed to me for free, because a man who asks who has been talking has just told you that his whole engine runs on a talker. He wasn't afraid I'd guessed. He was afraid I'd been told. Frost did not believe in foreknowledge. He believed in leaks, because leaks were his native tongue, and so the only frame he had for a woman who knew his moves in advance was that someone inside was feeding her the way someone inside was feeding him. He assumed a mole because he had bought a mole. It takes one to fear one. "Nobody's been talking to me," I said, and let him disbelieve it, because his disbelief was more useful to me than the truth would have been. He recovered. Of course he recovered. The recovery was 90% of the man. He smiled and reached for the thesis again the way a drowning person reaches for the same rope twice. "You're a formidable woman, Leandra. I mean that. If I ran this town, I'd want you running the plant. But you should understand something, formidable to formidable." He leaned in. "It doesn't matter what you know. Knowing isn't a defense either. By 6 o'clock the vote closes, the proxies land, the swing tips, and this becomes a corvid asset. You can see every move coming and still lose if the door's already been open from the inside. That's the part sentiment never understands. The wall doesn't matter. The wall never mattered. What matters is who already handed me the key." 40 mornings, and he had finally said the true thing to my face without knowing it was the true thing. He thought he was gloating. He was confessing. The whole takeover, the leaked pill, the schedule of lies to Eleanor Dubois, the forged block at 4, all of it depended on one person inside these walls with the ledger, the specimens, the seal, and my level of access, doing one small, deliberate act at one specific time. Not a storm. A key, turned by a hand I had been treating as a friend's. Because that was the thing the 40 mornings had finally forced me to see, and I had been avoiding it the way you avoid a stair you know is broken. The forgery at 4 o'clock required credentials I could count on one hand. The leak of the pill required a seat in the room where the trigger number lived. The two acts, together, narrowed the field to a fistful of people, and every one of them was someone I would have trusted with the building's life. Frost hadn't beaten Halden Instruments 90 times. He had simply once found the one hand inside it that would turn for him, and I had spent 90 mornings fighting the crow and never once looked at the door. 714, I said, half to myself, and I saw his eyes narrow because he didn't know what it meant, and I did, or I was beginning to. Somewhere in this day there was a call. Somewhere in this day, at a minute I had heard buzz through the wall of my own memory without ever weighing it. A phone lifted, and a voice said a small thing to Corvid Capital that started the whole clock. 7:14 in the morning. The leak had a timestamp. Everything real does. "I don't know what that is," Frost said, and for once I believed him. He didn't. He only knew the leak arrived. He had never needed to know the shape of the hand that sent it. That was mine to find. He stood. The meeting was over. He always ended them himself, another small dominion, standing before you could stand so that you rose in response to him. 40 mornings I had risen in response to him. Not this one. I was already up, already at the low cabinet by the door where he always left his coat, and I lifted it and held it open for him before he'd taken a step toward it. His own coat, offered by my own hands, a gesture that reads as deference and is in fact the opposite, because you cannot be surprised by a man whose coat you are already holding. He paused, looked at the coat, looked at me, and I watched Malcolm Frost do the arithmetic of a person who has just realized he doesn't have all the numbers and hates it more than he has hated anything in years. "You're going to lose today," he said, sliding one arm in, then the other, letting me settle it onto his shoulders because to shrug it off would have been a retreat. "You should know I take no pleasure in it." You take nothing but pleasure in it, I said pleasantly, smoothing the collar. It's the only thing you take that you don't have to forge. He left without the last word, which he had not managed once in 40 mornings. I stood in the doorway and watched the elevator take him down, and in the private ledger I have kept across 100 days no one else remembers, the book where I have graded every soul in this building by watching them make the same choice until I knew who they truly were, I wrote the line I had been waiting a long time to write. Malcolm Frost, Corvid Capital, a man who names his fund after the bird that steals, who cannot build, and so waits for others to build so he can carry off what shines. A man whose entire philosophy is that walls are a fiction, and the only real question is who inside already wants to be taken. Who is right about the walls, and wrong, fatally, and he does not yet know it, about the one thing he was sure he'd bought. Fail. But a grade is not a win, and I knew it. Failing Frost in a book only I could read did not stop a single one of his 3 moves. The pill still leaked at dawn. Eleanor Dubois still tipped by 2. The freed block still landed at 4, and at 6 o'clock, the gavel would still come down the wrong way, and the world would still go white, and I would still wake to the same gray light and the same untold time. I had mapped the machine perfectly, and the machine did not care that I had mapped it. Frost was almost right, and the almost was the only thing I had. Knowing wasn't a defense. He'd said so himself. Knowing was only where the defense began. Because his machine had a 4th move he had never mentioned, one so obvious to him that he'd stopped seeing it, the way you stop seeing the floor you stand on. All 3 of his weapons, the leak, the lie, the forgery, passed through a single point of failure. They all depended on the inside hand. Cut off the hand and the crow had nothing but a wall he could not climb and a philosophy that only worked on the naive. I did not need to beat Malcolm Frost. I had been trying to beat Malcolm Frost for 90 mornings, and the day had let me lose 90 times to teach me I was aiming at the wrong throat. I needed to find the person whose 714 call opened the gate, and I needed to be standing behind them when they made it. I sat down at my own desk that afternoon and I did the coldest arithmetic of the whole loop. Not who did I like, not who did I trust. Access, only access. Who in the entire building held all of it at once? The shareholder ledger with the specimen signatures, the seat in the room where the poison pill trigger number lived, the corporate seal, and a security clearance the twin of my own. Enough to move through the day invisibly and touch every one of the 3 moves without a single door logging a name it shouldn't. Not a wide field. A takeover this precise cannot be run from the mailroom. It has to be run from the top of the house, from a chair beside the chair, by someone the building would never think to watch because the building had already decided, years ago, to trust them on purpose. I made the list. It was very short, and I sat with it in the gray, failing light while the rain started at 11:40 the way it always started, and I made myself write down every name that fit and refused to flinch from any of them, even the ones that cost me something to write. There were only 3 people in the building with the access to open that gate. By the 95th morning, I had ruled out 2 of them. I did not want to be right about the 3rd. Chapter 5. The same call at 7:14. The coffee machine on the 9th floor takes 41 seconds to fill a cup, and I had learned to hate every one of them. I stood in the little kitchenette off the executive corridor at 7:09 in the morning, watching the stream of it, because from that exact spot, through the glass, I could see the whole length of the hall, the elevators, the war room, and the corner office with Alex's name on the door. I had chosen this cup, this morning, this angle, on purpose. Not for the coffee. I would not finish the coffee. I had not finished a cup of coffee in 90 days. I had ruled out 2 of the 3. Marcus Finch, the CFO, cold as a bank vault and twice as clean. I had watched him refuse Frost's people 90 times, in 90 small ways he never knew I saw. Leonard Stone, general counsel, a man who guarded the poison pill defense like a mother hen and would sooner resign than sign a lie. I had followed his morning down to the minute and found nothing but a decent man losing a fair fight. 2 access holders, 2 clean. That left 1. I had spent 4 loops not looking at the 3rd. That is the truth, and I will set it down plainly, because plainness is the only honest way to say a thing like this. For 4 mornings, I had built reasons to be elsewhere at 7:14. I found meetings that did not need me. I stood in the lobby. Once I rode the service elevator to the loading dock and back for no reason a sane person could name and told myself I was checking the courier logs. I was not checking the courier logs. I was refusing to stand where I could see. Because you find out who someone really is when you've watched them make the same choice 100 times and they never once make it differently. And I already knew, somewhere under the exhaustion, in the part of me that keeps the ledger, where the third pair of hands would be and what they would be doing, and I did not want the morning to prove it. So I made myself a cup of coffee I would not drink, and I stood at the glass and I waited for 7:14. Alex came out of his office at 7:11. He always did. I could have set a clock by the man, had, in fact, set my whole ruined life by him for 20 years. He had his phone in his hand and his jacket off, sleeves at the second button, and he was smiling at something on the screen the way you smile at a friend's text, easy and unguarded. He looked from where I stood exactly like the person I trusted most in the world. That was the cruelty of it. The betrayal doesn't come wearing a mask. It comes wearing the face you love. He glanced down the hall. He always did that too, a small check, left and right, the kind of thing you never notice until you have watched it 90 times and understood it was never idle. Then he stepped into the stairwell alcove by the freight elevator, the dead zone where the corridor cameras don't reach and the acoustics swallow a low voice, and he lifted the phone to his ear. 7:14. I did not need to hear the words. I had heard them once, on the 86th morning, when I finally made myself stand close, flat against the far side of the alcove wall with a folder in my hands like a woman looking for a signature. 9 sentences. He said the same 9 sentences every morning, in the same order, with the same little laugh in the fourth one that I used to think was warmth. It's clean on this end. She doesn't have it. Move the chase block by 4, and I'll have the paper to you before close. A pause. The laugh. No, she trusts me. That's the whole point. She trusts me. She trusts me. That's the whole point. I want to tell you I broke. I want to tell you the cup fell, that the glass rang, that some human sound came out of me that a person could point to and say, there. That is the moment she learned. There was nothing. I have practiced stillness across 90 mornings the way other people practice scales, and it held. I set the cup down on the counter, untouched, and I wrote in the ledger I keep behind my eyes, the one no living soul can read, the one line I had spent 4 mornings not writing. Alexander Reed. Fail. It is a small word for what it carries. Here is the thing about grief that arrives on a schedule. You can study it. That is the one mercy of a morning that will not end. I could not unknow Alex, but I could know him better. So over the loops that followed, I stopped hiding from 7:14 and started living inside it, close as breath, learning the shape of the thing he had built. He was not a monster. I need to say that before I say the rest, because I know how the story wants to go, and it is wrong. I watched Alex Cole make his choice 90 times, and never once did he make it with a raider's ease. His shoulders came up before the call, his free hand pressed flat against the wall, hard, the way a man braces on a boat. There was a morning, the 73rd, I think, where he stood in that alcove for a full 90 seconds with the phone dark in his hand before he dialed, and I thought that morning that he might not. He always did. But he made me watch him not want to, every single time, and if you think that made it easier, you have never loved anyone. Piece by piece, I assembled it. The 7:14 call was the promise. The 4 p.m. delivery was the payment. At 4, every afternoon, in the 12-minute window when the proxy tabulation room ran its verification pass and the floor thinned out for the shift, Alex walked a single sealed envelope from his office to the transfer clerk's desk on 8, a proxy assignment, one of 40 legitimate ones, indistinguishable to any eye that hadn't seen it 90 times. Except one signature block inside it had never been signed by the shareholder whose name it bore. The Chase Family Trust's voting block, 41,000 shares, reassigned by a hand that was not theirs, timed to land after Leonard's verification pass had already closed. A forged proxy. The inside key. The one act at the one time that turned a fair fight Frost was losing into a vote he could not lose. I had spent 40 mornings mapping Frost's plan from the outside, and here it was from the inside, and the inside was worse, because the inside had a face I had eaten lunch with for 2 decades. And then I saw the other thing. The thing that made me stop grieving and start counting. Every loop, the leak got a name. And the name was never Alex. It was Sachi. I have to explain how neat it was, because the neatness is what told me it was designed. At 9:40 every morning, Sachi Tanaka, 26 years old, brilliant, the kind of honest that has not yet learned to be afraid, pulled the poison pill defense model from the shared drive to check a figure she thought was wrong. She was right. The figure was wrong. She was the only person in the building who caught it, 90 mornings running, because she was the only person who still looked. That access left a fingerprint, a timestamp, a user ID, a document touched an hour before the same document walked out the door to Corvid. Alex knew her schedule. Of course he knew her schedule. He'd approved it. So he timed his own extraction to ride in behind hers, pulled the file himself at 9:52 from a terminal logged under a service account he had the rights to spoof, so that when the forensic team came looking, and they always came looking, the trail read, Junior Analyst accesses defense model at 9:40. Defense model appears in Raider's hands by noon. Motive optional. The system supplies the story. The youngest, the newest, the one with no allies on the board and a whistleblower's reputation already whispered about her. Of course it was her. It's always the ambitious kid. Everyone knew that. Everyone agreed. I had watched the board agree. In that awful, comfortable way rooms agree on the person it costs them nothing to lose. And here is my confession, the one I owe more than any other, so I will not dress it up. For 90 mornings, I did the same thing to Sachi that Alex did. He framed her to hide a crime. I spent her to fight one. Every loop I had pushed that girl forward, made her my whistleblower, my clean witness, my sacrificial pawn against Frost. And every loop she was destroyed for it, blacklisted, unhireable. Her name a thing people said quietly. I told myself it was the company. I told myself the town, the jobs, Arthur's life's work, the greater good. I graded her pass, and then I spent her like she was small. You find out who someone really is when you've watched them make the same choice 100 times, and never once differently. I had been watching the wrong someone. I did not confront Alex. I want that understood because every cell in me wanted to. There was a morning I stood 2 feet behind him at 7:14 and opened my mouth. But a confrontation is a single door, and behind it is a version of this day where he panics, or lies, or destroys the paper trail I need, and I have to burn a whole morning learning nothing and wake at 6 with him warned. I had 90 mornings of one lesson from Malcolm Frost, and the lesson was this. You do not close on your enemy until you have the paper. You let him commit. You guide the noose. You do not throw it. So I became his shadow. I let him make every call. And each loop I gathered one more piece that would survive the reset only because I carried it. The exact service account, the exact timestamps, the 9 sentences, the 4 o'clock walk, the clerk's name, the drawer. I built a case no forensic team could build because I was the only investigator alive who got the crime scene back, clean, every single morning. Loop-proof. I could not photograph a thing, but I could memorize a day until it fit in my hand like a stopped watch. Arthur's watch was in my pocket that whole stretch, as it always was, frozen at 6 o'clock, the small dead weight of it against my hip. A company is just people who decided to trust each other on purpose, he used to say. Alex had been in the room where that decision got made. Alex had been the person other people pointed to when they wanted to know if a thing was safe. That is what made him worth so much to Frost. You don't buy a stranger to open a fortress. You buy the man everyone already lets pass the gate. Every fortress falls from the inside. Frost's line. He'd said it to my face, smug, on the 40th morning, and I'd thought he meant the company. He meant Alex. He'd always meant Alex. He knew the mole before I did, and he'd let me thrash at the walls for 90 days while the traitor sat, every morning, at my right hand in the war room, sliding me coffee, telling me we've got this, big day. Grief, you can study. But there is a point where study runs out, and you need another living person in the world, and I had spent 90 mornings utterly alone inside a day only I remembered. Everyone forgets. I'm the only one who has to remember. I could not carry Alex's face and Sachi's ruin and the whole shape of the trap by myself for one more loop. I needed a witness who would still be a witness after 6 o'clock on the one morning I meant to make count. I needed to tell someone the truth. and there was only one person in that building I trusted with a truth that impossible. Ethan Caldwell worked late in the engineering lab, which meant he worked early too. He was the only executive on the floor before 8, and I had counted on that. I found him at the long steel bench under the north windows at 7:40, sleeves shoved up, a torn-down spectrometer laid out in front of him like a patient, the gray morning light doing its usual honest work on his face. Ethan had Arthur's steadiness in him, the same refusal to be rushed, the same way of looking at a broken thing as a question rather than an insult. "Lena," he didn't look up right away. "You're pale. You been sleeping?" "No," I said, which was the truest thing I'd said to a living person in 3 months. "Ethan, I need 10 minutes, and I need you to not decide I've lost my mind until the end." That got him to set down the driver. He has kind eyes, and he turned them on me full, and I felt the pull of wanting, very simply, to be believed by him. A want I had not let myself feel in 90 mornings because there had been no one on the far side of it. I put it down. There would be time, or there wouldn't. Both were true, and neither was now. "Something's wrong with the vote," he said. "You've been saying that for 2 days. Everyone thinks you're grieving, paranoid, sentimental about Arthur's company. I know what everyone thinks. I helped them think it some loops when it was useful." I watched that word land and not land. "I'm going to tell you something, and it is going to sound insane, and I am not going to argue with you about whether it's true. I'm going to prove it. Do you have your phone?" "Yes." "Look at the time. 7:43. "In about 50 seconds, I said, Evelyn Chase is going to call the main engineering line, not your cell, the desk line, because she doesn't have your cell, and she is going to ask you in exactly these words whether the atrium retrofit can be value engineered before the transition. She's going to say transition, not acquisition, because she's decided the deal is done and she's already redecorating. You're going to tell her the retrofit's structural and can't be cut. She's going to sigh and say, everyone keeps telling me no today. Then she's going to hang up without saying goodbye because she never says goodbye when she's embarrassed. Ethan looked at me the way you look at a person you're deciding whether to worry about. The desk phone rang. I watched him not move for one full ring. Then he crossed to it, slow, his eyes on me the whole way, and he picked it up. Brant. A pause. I saw his face change. A small thing, a tightening. The retrofit's structural, Evelyn. It can't be cut. A longer pause. His eyes came up and found mine and did not leave. Whatever he heard in that receiver, I had said it 40 seconds before he heard it. I understand, he said quietly. And then the line went dead in his hand, and he stood there holding a phone that had hung up on him without a goodbye, and the color went out of him the way it goes out of a man who has just felt the floor of the world move. She didn't say goodbye, he said. She never does when she's embarrassed. Lena. His voice had dropped to almost nothing. How? So I told him. All of it, fast and flat, the way you report a fire. 6 a.m., 6 p.m., the white flash, 90 mornings. The gavel that always falls the same way. The ledger, the grating. That I had lived this exact day until I knew where every soul in the building would be standing at every minute of it. And that this, the retrofit call, the missing goodbye, was the smallest coin I could spend to make him understand, because the large truth was too heavy to hand a man cold. And Ethan Caldwell, God bless the engineer in him, did not tell me I was grieving. He sat down slowly on the lab stool, and he was quiet for a long moment, and then he said the thing that told me I'd chosen right. If you've lived it 90 times. He stopped, started again. Then you already know what I'm going to say next. You're going to ask me who, I said. You're going to ask me who opened the gate, and when I tell you, you're not going to believe me, and that's fine, because I didn't want to believe me either. His jaw set. Tell me. I told him. I watched a good man take a blow he'd never have taken standing if he'd seen it coming. Alex. Ethan had known Alex for 15 years. They'd built the atrium wing together, and I watched him do the thing that made me trust him with the last morning. He didn't refuse it. He didn't say, not possible, not Alex, you're wrong. He went white, and still, and then he said, in a voice like a man reading the load rating off a beam, 7:14. You said 7:14. I can be at the freight alcove at 7:14 tomorrow. I want to see it with my own. There is no tomorrow, I said. There's only this morning again. But yes, this time you'll see it with me. He looked at me then, really looked. The exhaustion and the certainty and the 90 mornings of it, and something in his face that had been holding me at arm's length for 3 months quietly stopped. He reached over and, without a word, straightened the watch chain where it had slipped from my pocket. Arthur's watch, the stopped one, a small, careful, unbearable gesture, the first time in 90 days anyone had touched a thing that was mine. Okay, he said. Then we've got this morning. What do you need me to do? I could have kissed him. I didn't. There is a version of this where I let that in, and it is a good version, and I have decided to believe it's waiting on the far side of 6 o'clock. For now, I just said, stand where I tell you, remember what I tell you, and when the room breaks, be the one still standing next to me. Always was, he said. Zola Mensa caught me in the corridor at 8:15, which was new. She had my calendar in her hand and a line between her brows. You moved the halberd call to 8:50, she said, before it happened. Did I? You did. Yesterday you told me to hold it, and the reason you gave me at 9:05 was the exact thing that went wrong at 9. She was watching me the way she watches a number that won't reconcile. Zola had run my professional life for 11 years. She knew my tells better than I did, and I had gotten sloppy, letting foreknowledge leak into my scheduling because I was tired, because it saved a loop's worth of grief to just fix the thing before it broke. Lena, you've done that 4 times this week. You keep knowing things a beat before they're knowable. She lowered her voice. I'm not asking you to explain it. I'm telling you I noticed. And if I noticed, be careful who else does. I looked at her, sharp, warm, loyal Zola, who had never once in 11 years failed to be exactly who I'd graded her, and I made a note. Not today, but soon. There was room, on the morning I meant to make the last one, for one more person on my side of the truth, and Zola Mensa had just earned her way onto the short list of the living I would trust. Pass. I'd known it for 89 mornings. It was good, for once, to have it confirmed by something she did today. I'll be careful, I said. Zola, thank you, for noticing. She didn't know what she was being thanked for. She narrowed her eyes anyway and let it go, and went to move the call I'd already moved. The rain would start at 11:40. It always did. Alex would slide me a coffee at 3:30 and say, "We've got this, kid," and I would take it and thank him and not drink it, and at 4 o'clock he would carry a sealed envelope to a clerk on the 8th floor and hand my mentor's company to a man who took things apart for sport. I knew every minute of the day ahead the way you know the words of a song you hate. I stood at the north windows a moment longer than I needed to, Ethan's care still warm on the watch chain, Zola's suspicion filed and dear, Sachi's fingerprint waiting at 9:40 to be turned into a lie, and I let myself feel, once, all the way down, the full weight of what I now carried and could not put down. I had spent 90 mornings trying to save a building. I had 90 mornings of proof that the man who betrayed it had been sitting to my right the whole time. Today was going to be the last morning, one way or another. Chapter 6. The Last Loop. Rain would start at 11:40. It always did. I sat in the parking structure at 6:31, engine off, watching the gray light lie flat against the concrete pillars, and I let myself do the thing I never let myself do. I let myself be tired. Not the ordinary tired of a long week, the other kind, the kind that has no floor under it. I had lived this Tuesday 90 times. I had memorized the cough of the man who bought coffee at the corner cart at 6:48. I knew which fluorescent tube on the 3rd floor would flicker at 9:15 and steady itself by 9:16. I knew the rain, the text at 6:02, the coffee I would carry up and never finish. I knew the exact weight of the day the way you know the weight of a coat you have worn until the lining goes to threads. And on this morning, the 91st, I sat in the dark of the parking structure and understood that I had finally reached the bottom of my own patience, and that there was nothing down there. Just concrete. Just me. Alex's text came at 6:02. My phone lit the dashboard. Big day, we've got this. I had watched him send that message 90 times. My oldest friend, the man who had stood up at Arthur's memorial and said the word family and made a room full of executives cry. The man who, at 7:14 this very morning, would step into the stairwell between the 4th and 5th floors, where the reception went thin and no one loitered, and make a call that would end everything Arthur had built. I knew it the way I knew the rain. I had stood behind him for every one of those calls, 90 of them. I had heard the low, careful voice, the numbers, the coordinates of surrender. We've got this. I put the phone face down on the seat and pressed my thumb against Arthur's pocket watch through the fabric of my coat where it always was. Frozen at 6. It never moved. Neither in any way that counted did I. I had run this day as a strategist for 90 mornings. Today I did not want to be a strategist. I wanted to walk up to him and watch his face fall. That was my first mistake, and I made it knowing it was 7:11 a.m. I found him at the coffee station on 4, and that was already wrong, because at 7:11, Alex was supposed to be at his desk pretending to read the overnight European numbers. He turned when he heard me, and the surprise on his face was real. I had spent 90 loops learning the difference between his real face and his working one. This was real. "You're early," he said. "You're never early. You're a 7:40 animal, Mercer." Not today. Something in my voice must have carried because he set down the little metal pitcher of milk very slowly, the way you set down anything when you have decided to keep both hands visible. "Okay," he said. "What's going on?" I should have smiled. I should have said the thing I said on the good loops, the loops where I was patient, where I was the surgeon and not the wound. Nothing. Long night, big day. Instead, I looked at my friend of 20 years and I said, "I know about the stairwell." The pitcher didn't fall. He was better than that. But I watched the color go out from under his tan in a single downward wash, like a shade being drawn, and I knew I had it right, and I knew in the same instant that I had thrown away the whole day to get the confession, and I did not care, because I was so tired. "Lena," his voice had gone to gravel. "I don't—" 7:14, the call, between 4 and 5 where the signal drops. I kept my own voice level, that much I could still do. "You forged the Blackwood proxy, Alex. You leaked the poison pill terms to Corvid in February. You've been Frost's key the whole time. You are the reason this closes at 6 o'clock, every single time." He didn't ask what I meant by every time. He didn't have the room. He had gone somewhere very small and very cold inside himself, and for a moment I saw a thing I had not been prepared to see. Not guilt. That I'd braced for. This was worse. It was relief. As if the worst weight a man can carry is a secret. And I had just unbelievably offered to take one corner of it. "How long have you known?" he said. "Long enough." "Then you know I'm not." He stopped. His jaw worked. "You think I woke up one day and decided to burn Arthur's house down? You've known me since we were both nothing, Lena. You think that's who I am?" I stopped being sure what anyone is. "Ask me why." He stepped closer, and his eyes were wet and furious and pleading all at once. "You're so smart you figured out the how, the times, the proxy. Ask me the why. Frost didn't buy me. He built me. He spent 2 years building the hole I fell into. The medical thing with—" His voice cracked clean through. "You don't even know. You don't know what he did to my family. There's a debt that isn't a debt. It's a leash. And he engineered every link of it, and the day he pulled it, he told me exactly which people I'd be hurting if I didn't, and exactly which one I'd be saving. And Stop. I chose the one." He was crying now, openly, my unbreakable Alex, at a coffee station at 7:12 in the morning. "I chose the one over the many, and I have hated myself every hour since, and I would do it again. Because it's my kid, Lena. It's my kid." The silence after that had a texture. I had lived this Tuesday 90 times, and I had never once heard those words, because I had never once been standing this close, this early, with the pin already pulled. There were rooms in this day I had never entered. This was one of them. And I hated that it was true, because true things are heavier than lies, and Frost had known exactly how heavy this one would be when he built it, and had built it anyway. That was the cruelty of the man laid bare. He had not corrupted Alex. He had found the one door in a good man that a good man would open himself if you made the price on the other side a child, and he had spent 2 patient years widening it. I want to tell you I stood there and felt nothing, that the cold steel I had forged over 90 mornings held. It did not hold. Because here is the thing about foreknowledge. It makes you a monster if you let it. For 90 mornings I had graded this building like a school teacher grading the dead. Pass. Fail. I had watched Sachi Tanaka do the brave, doomed thing 90 times, and I had spent her 90 times, pushed her forward as my whistleblower, my pawn, and watched her get branded the leak and blacklisted and destroyed to cover the real mole, the man weeping in front of me, and I had told myself it was necessary. I had told myself the company was the many and Sachi was the one, and that a serious person chooses the many. Alex had just told me he chose the one. And standing there, I understood, with the flat horror of looking in a mirror you did not know was a mirror, that I had spent 90 mornings choosing the opposite and calling it virtue. He spent a company to save his child. I had spent a child. That was what Sachi was. 26 and luminous, and mine to protect, to save a company. We had made the same trade in opposite directions, and we had both called it love. I was becoming him. Worse, I was becoming the man who made him. Malcolm Frost spent people the way other men spend loose change, and here I was, 90 mornings deep, with a ledger of souls and a habit of feeding the youngest one into the fire every single day at 4 p.m. because the arithmetic favored it. "I have to go," I said, and my voice came out wrong. And I turned and left him crying at the coffee station, and I heard him say my name once, and I did not stop. The day detonated exactly the way I knew it would, now that I had knocked the pin loose at dawn. Alex, cornered and terrified, and no longer certain what I would do, went to Frost early. I knew because at 10:20 my phone rang with a number I had answered 30 times before, and Malcolm Frost's smooth, unhurried voice said, "Leandra, I hear you've been asking your colleagues indelicate questions." And I knew the board meeting at 2 would be a slaughter, because a frightened mole moves his timeline up, and a raider who knows he's been seen closes the trap early rather than clean. The forged proxy that normally arrived at 4 came at 1. Evelyn Chase, who normally wavered until 5, folded by 3 because Frost had gotten to her first. Finch, my accidental ally on the good loops, never got the chance to see what I could show him. And Sachi. At 3:40, in a loop I had bent out of true with my own impatience, they named her the leak. I hadn't pushed her forward this time. I hadn't done anything this time. I had spent the day reeling, and it did not matter. The frame was load-bearing. It did not need me to build it. Frost's people needed a name that wasn't Alex's, and the youngest, brightest, least protected person in the building was the name that cost them the least. I watched from the back of the 4th-floor bullpen as Leonard Stone, gentle Leonard, who I had cleared of everything, walked to her desk with 2 people from an outside firm and asked her, kindly, to come with them. I watched her stand up. I watched her look around the room for someone to tell her it was a mistake, and find no one, because I had spent the day too far inside my own exhaustion to be standing where I always stood. She looked so much like me. That was the thing that finished me. 26 years old with a spine made of the same stubborn integrity that had made Arthur pick me out of 100 applicants. And I had learned across 90 mornings to feed exactly that quality into the machine because it burned so clean. I could have moved. Even wrecked, I knew 4 ways to pull her out of that frame in the 90 seconds I had. But every one of them cost the day. Every one of them traded her rescue for the deal's collapse. And some cold accountant still living in the back of my skull ran the numbers even as I watched her stand. The many, the town, the wall. And I did not move. I stood at the back of the bullpen and let the arithmetic win, one more time, because 90 mornings had trained me to, and I watched them walk her out. And the last thing I saw before the door closed was her looking back at where I always stood and finding it empty. I had not even given her the dignity of being betrayed on purpose. I had lost her by being absent. There is a failure worse than cruelty, and that was it. The gavel fell at 6. Frost won, the way he always won. The world went white. 6 a.m. The gray light. The ceiling I had memorized. The 91st morning began, and I did not get up. I lay in the flat dawn, and I thought with a calm that frightened me, let it burn. I could do it. I had the power. 90 mornings had taught me every seam in this day, every soft place where a lever could go. I could walk into that building and salt the earth. I could hand Alex to Frost and Frost to Alex and watch them destroy each other. I could stop protecting any of them. Finch, Evelyn, Leonard, the whole board of cowards who called my grief sentiment, and let the deal close and let the town lose its jobs and let Arthur's name come off the building and simply stop. Stop trying. 90 mornings of trying and the day fell every time like a law of physics, and maybe the only sane response to a law of physics is to stop pushing on the wall. The temptation was not anger. I want to be precise because I have been precise about everything else. The temptation was rest. It offered itself as rest. Just let go. Stop grading. Stop remembering. Everyone forgets. You're the only one who has to remember, so stop. Let the morning have you. And I lay there and I felt the pocket watch on the nightstand where I set it every night that no longer existed. Arthur's watch stopped at 6. And I heard his voice, the one I never made peace with, the argument we never finished before he died and I never got to take back. A company is just people who decided to trust each other on purpose. Not a building, not a stock price, not a fortress. People. And I thought, you have been asking the wrong question. I had spent 90 mornings asking the same question in 90 different costumes. How do I win? How do I save it? How do I hold the wall? I had asked it as a strategist, as a spy, as a lawyer, as a saboteur. I had run the swing shareholder 40 ways and the board 20, and Frost himself so many times I could recite his cadence. Every question I had ever asked this morning was a variation on, how do I win? And the morning had answered every single one the same way. No, no, no. 90 times, no. Because that was never the question the morning was holding out to me. You find out who someone really is when you've watched them make the same choice 100 times and they never once make it differently. I had built that sentence to judge other people. Alex at 7:14, Frost handing me his coat, Sachi, brave and doomed. I had watched them and graded them, and I had never once turned the sentence around and pointed it at myself. I had watched myself make the same choice 90 times, save the company, spend the people, feed the youngest one into the fire, and I had never made it differently, not once, and I had called it strategy. Alex chose one person over the many and hated himself. I chose the many over one person and gave myself an A. We were the same animal. The only difference was the direction of the arithmetic, and Frost had taught us both to do the math. So I lay in the gray light of the 91st morning, and I asked the other question. The one the day had been waiting 90 mornings for me to ask. Not how do I win? Who am I refusing to lose? And the answer came so fast and so simple that I laughed, a cracked, terrible, wonderful sound in the empty apartment, because it had been standing in front of me since the first morning, holding a stack of files, believing the truth would protect her. Sachi. Not the company, not Arthur's name on the atrium, not the wall. Her. The person I had sacrificed at 4 p.m. 90 times running. I was not going to lose her again. Not this morning. Not to save anything. She came first this time. First. Not last, not never, and everything else in the day would have to arrange itself around that single fixed star, or it could burn for all I cared. The exhaustion was still there. It did not lift like fog in a movie, but it changed weight. It stopped being the tiredness of a woman pushing a wall that would not move and became the ordinary, bearable tiredness of a woman who finally knows which way to walk. I got up. I wound nothing. The watch stays stopped until it doesn't, but I put it in my pocket the way you'd take a witness. And I began, for the 91st time, to build the day. Only this time I built it backwards, from the person out. 6:02. Alex's text. Big day, we've got this. I looked at it for a long moment, and for the first time I did not feel only betrayal. I felt the debt behind it, the leash, the kid. It changed nothing about what he had done. Understanding is not the same as forgiving, and neither is the same as letting him take the town down. But I typed back what I had never typed back. Thanks, D, because a trap set by someone who has stopped seeing the human being is just a smaller version of Frost, and I had decided this morning not to become that. Alex was a fail. I would still write it in the ledger, but I would not spend him the way he'd been spent. That was the line. That was the whole line. Then I made the day. First, Sachi. I would not push her forward as the whistleblower this morning. I would do the opposite of 90 mornings. At 8:15, before the building filled, I would find her and I would take the dangerous files out of her hands, physically, personally, and put my own name on them, because I was the COO, and I could survive being the leak, and she could not. The dossier would be mine to carry into that boardroom. She would be nowhere near the frame. When Frost's people came looking for a name that wasn't Alex's, they would find mine, standing in the open, unafraid, holding 90 mornings of proof. Let them try to blacklist the person who was about to end them. Second, the evidence. The forged Blackwood proxy arrived at 4 p.m. on a clean loop, Alex's own hand, delivered through the same courier to the same floor. I knew the delivery cold. This time I would not intercept it and spook the play. I would let it arrive, and I would have Zola Mensa positioned to receive and preserve it, chain of custody, timestamps, the works, so that when I sprang it in the meeting, it would be authenticated, not merely alleged. Frost's whole scheme was built to look like the company's own shareholders had freely voted their doom. The proxy was the seam. Preserved, it was a knife. Third, Zola. On the good loops, I had learned she was already half noticing that I knew things before they happened, the way I'd flinch a second before the fire drill, name the caller before the phone rang. This morning I would not hide it. I would tell her enough. Zola was sharp and warm and loyal to the marrow, and once she was inside my knowledge, she was the best set of hands in the building. She would run the floor while I ran the room. Fourth, Marcus Finch. The cold numbers man, the obvious suspect, the red herring I had cleared across a dozen loops. Ruthless, yes. Clean on this, yes. And I had learned, quietly, furiously loyal to the enterprise as a machine that ran correctly, which meant a man who would come apart at the seams over a forged proxy, because a forged proxy was a lie in the numbers, and Marcus Finch could forgive many things, but not a lie in the numbers. On the good loops, it took me until 4 to win him. This morning, I'd have him by 10. With the one figure I'd memorized that he could verify himself, and that only the real books and Corvid's leak could reconcile. Show Finch the seam, and Finch becomes a hammer. Fifth, Ethan. I had told him the truth about the loop on the last morning, convinced him by predicting the next 60 seconds to the syllable, and watched a steady, kind man decide to believe an impossible thing because he trusted the person saying it. He remembered none of it now. The reset took him too. I would have to earn it again from scratch. I would, because I needed one person inside these walls who knew what I knew and stood beside me anyway, not as a piece on the board, but as the one I'd finally let close. I was done doing this alone, and the swing shareholder, old Blackwood's institutional block, the votes Frost had forged because he couldn't win them honestly. I knew what they wanted. 90 mornings of listening had taught me the exact assurance about the town and the workforce that would move them to vote the company's way in daylight. No forgery required. Secure them clean, and the forged proxy stops being a weapon Frost needs and tends the rope he hangs by. Secure the shareholder, preserve the proxy, shield Sachi, line up Finch and Zola, bring Ethan close. One day. Everything 90 mornings had taught me, aimed for the first time not at the wall, but at the people standing in front of it. I stood in the gray 6 a.m. light with the stopped watch in my pocket, and the day laid out in front of me like a thing I finally understood. And I felt the held breath of it, that stillness before the drop, the inhale you take at the top of the stairs, settle into my chest and stay there, waiting for 6 o'clock. Pass, I thought, looking at the morning. Not the building, the question. For 90 mornings, I woke up asking how to win. On the 91st, I woke up asking who I refused to lose. That was the question the morning had been waiting for. Chapter 7. The 91st morning. This time, I did not reach for the watch. For 90 mornings, my first waking motion had been to close my hand around Arthur's stopped watch. The way you check a wound is still there. On the 91st, I let it lie on the nightstand and got up. The rain would still come at 11:40, it always did, but I was not going to stand at a window waiting for the day to take something from me. I had somewhere to be first. At 6 o'clock, the gray light came in flat and colorless, the light of an hour that had never once belonged to me. At 6:02, the phone buzzed. Alex. Big day, we've got this. 90 mornings I'd read those 4 words, and for 89 they had felt like a friend's hand on my shoulder. On the 90th, I learned what they were. A man checking I still trusted him because the plan needed it. I set the phone face down and picked up Arthur's watch. stopped at 6 o'clock, as it had been for a year, the gold hands frozen at the top of the dial like two people holding their breath. A company is just people who decided to trust each other on purpose. He said it the way other men said grace. For 90 mornings, I had tried to save the company. This morning, I would save the people and let the company follow. I dressed without hurrying. When you have lived a day 90 times, you stop rushing. You know every minute. 6:41 a.m. I was in the lobby of Halden Instruments before the security desk finished its shift change. In the hum of the empty building, I had come to know better than my own pulse. I did not go to my office. I went down to the analyst's floor, to a corner desk with a chipped mug that said, "World's okayest statistician," and waited. Sachi Tanaka came in at 6:52, early, because she thought being early was a form of respect. She stopped when she saw me in the chair by her desk. On other mornings, I had used that surprise, warmed her up, and by 9 talked her into being the whistleblower, the name on the thing that got her destroyed by noon and blacklisted by 6. 89 times I had watched a good young woman burn to buy a lever I never once managed to pull hard enough. Not today. "Sachi," I said, "I need you to do something and not ask why until tonight." "Okay," she said, because she trusted me. God help her. "Go home." She blinked. "It's the vote today. Everything's today." "I know exactly what's today." I stood. "Your credentials get pulled at 10:15. Someone files a report naming you as the source of a leak you had nothing to do with. By this afternoon, there's a tidy paper trail making you the person who sold this company, already written." Her face went pale in the specific way I had seen so many times I could have painted it. "That's not... I didn't..." "I know you didn't. That's the point. You're the cleanest person in this building, which is why you were chosen to be the stain." I put a flash drive on her desk, one of 6 copies, because I had learned never to trust a single copy to a single day. "Take this and your laptop. Go home, log into nothing, wait for my call. If I don't call by 7, send what's on that drive to every regulator on the list in the folder. But I'm going to call." "Yes," she whispered. "Good." I handed her the okayest statistician mug, the one thing she'd be sad to lose. "You're not the leak, Sachi. You never were. Now go." She went, and something clenched for 90 days loosened a notch. For the first time, the first move of the day was not a sacrifice, but a rescue. 7:09 a.m. I stood in the corridor outside the small conference room on 11, where the light didn't reach, and waited, as I had 5 times before, to watch a friend become someone I had to stop. Alex Cole came up the back stairs at 7:12, phone already in hand. He didn't see me. Nobody ever saw me on this morning. He shut the door most of the way, and at 7:14 exactly, he made the call. I had heard his half of it 40 times. "It's handled. She doesn't know. The proxies come at 4. Just make sure the wire clears." The same words, same minute, same morning, for 90 days. You find out who someone really is when you've watched them make the same choice 100 times, and they never once make it differently. Alex never did. Neither, I had finally admitted, had I. I did not open the door. Confronting him here had detonated before. He panicked, warned Frost, the whole day tightening into a noose around my throat. I let him finish, let him walk out past me toward the elevators, shoulders down, face gray, because I had seen he did not do this lightly. He did it like a man wading into cold water. That did not make it forgivable, it made it sad. And 90 mornings teaches you to hold both. Then I made my own calls, the part no one will ever see. Marcus Finch first, our CFO, cold as a ledger, the man everyone assumed was the traitor because he had the warmth of a bank vault. I had ruled him out around the 40th morning, ruthless but clean, and he had loved Arthur in the flinty way of a man who doesn't say so. I met him at 8:15. "The proxies arriving at 4 for the swing block are forged," I said. "A notary that doesn't exist, signatures lifted from a filing 18 months old. Corvid needs that block for a majority. Without it, the vote's a coin toss, and Frost doesn't gamble." On most mornings, he told me I was emotional and asked me to leave. But I had spent 40 mornings learning the exact facts that made Marcus Finch stop and listen, and I laid them on his desk in the order that worked. He read it without expression, set it down. "If this is real, the whole raid is fraud." "It's real, and yes," I stood. "Be in the boardroom at 4. Bring the transfer agent records. When I ask you a question in front of everyone, answer with a number. That's all. Frost controls the floor. Chase will gavel you down inside 30 seconds. I've seen how it goes, Marcus. 4 o'clock. Then Zola. Zola Mensa had noticed, 3 loops back, that I knew things before they happened. I told her a version of the truth she could hold, and she believed the part that mattered and asked nothing about the rest. By 9, she had the boardroom's audio-visual under her control and the swing shareholders dial-in on my desk. A pass from the first morning I ever graded her. And Ethan. Ethan Caldwell, head of engineering, the one living soul I had told everything, the loop, the reset, the white flash, and convinced by predicting the next 60 seconds of his own life until the color left his face. He met me on the stairwell at 10:30. And if it doesn't work, if 6 o'clock comes and... He didn't finish. He knew what 6 o'clock did. Then I'll do it again tomorrow and try the 90-second version. I meant it to sound like steel. It came out tired. Lena. He put his hand over mine on the railing just a second. You told me the truth when no one on earth could have believed you. Whatever happens at 6, you already did the hardest thing. It was the only new hour I'd been given in a long time. I had it for 1 second, then went to war. 11:40 a.m. The rain started, on schedule. For 90 mornings, it had meant the day was half spent, and the loss was coming. Today, it meant we were on time. The swing shareholder was a Northern Counties pension fund, represented by a careful, decent woman named Eleanor Dubois, who managed the retirements of 40,000 people. On 89 mornings, the forged proxies wearing her name had gone Frost's way, and I had never had the standing to reach her before 4. I had it now. I had learned her objections across a dozen loops the way you learn a song, and answered them before she raised them, and by 2:50 she said the thing I had waited a very long time to hear. Ms. Harding, if what you say about those proxies is true, then someone is voting my beneficiaries' shares without their consent. It's true, I said, and I can prove it in the room at 4. All I need is for you to be on the call, and to say when I ask whether you authorized the proxy Corvid is about to submit under your fund's name. A pause. The rain on the glass. 40,000 retirements on the other end of the line. I did not authorize it, Eleanor Dubois said. I'll say so. 4 p.m. The boardroom is a long table under a window that holds the whole gray town in it, the town Arthur built, that fills its shifts because a precision instruments company keeps its lights on. I had sat at that table 90 times and lost. That afternoon I sat down and was not tired anymore. Tired happens to people who don't know how it ends, and I finally did, because I was going to end it. Malcolm Frost came in at 4:01, smooth as poured water, in the gray suit and the smile he wore every time, and said what he always said to Evelyn Chase as he sat. Shall we not drag this out? Everyone's had a long day. Chase, our board chair, image first and spine optional, reached for the gavel, as she had 90 times. Alex sat to my right, a leather folder in front of him. On 89 afternoons, that folder had produced the forged proxies, handed up to the chair with a quiet word about the Vance authorization. He reached for it now. I put my hand flat on the table. Before the chair calls the vote, I said, I'd like the record to reflect a few things. Chase's mouth tightened. Lena, we've been through the objections. You haven't been through these. I stood. And you'll want them on the record, Evelyn, because in 20 minutes you'll be very glad you were the chair who allowed them rather than the one who gavelled them down. That reached her. Evelyn Chase's true north was not courage, but the story told about her afterward, and I had just handed her a better one. She hesitated, and that was all I needed. Permission never comes. You have to already be talking when they decide. I'm going to tell you what each person in this room is about to say, I said, and then tell you why. Frost's smile didn't move, but his eyes did. This is theatrical, even for, Malcolm, you're about to say, this is theatrical. You did. I looked around the table. Leonard, you're about to ask if I have counsel present. Marcus says nothing, because Marcus never speaks until he has a number worth speaking. And Alex, I did not look at him yet. Alex is about to open that folder and hand the chair proxies for the Vance block. Go ahead, Alex. Open it. He didn't. His hand had stopped on the folder. I've seen this morning 90 times, I said quietly now, because quiet carried better in that room. I know what each of you will say before you say it. Watch. And I recited it. I told Chase the sentence she'd been about to use to move the vote, word for word, and her face went white when I got it right. I told Leonard Stone the objection he was drawing breath to make and answered it first. I told Frost the 3 moves he had left: point of order, appeal to the chair, the threat about litigation costs, in the order he always played them, and watched the smoothness go out of him like water from a cracked glass. A man 1 move ahead doesn't know what to do with someone 90 moves ahead. You can't know that, he said, the first unrehearsed thing I had ever heard him say. I know all of it, I said. You don't want this company. You want its patents, its property, its transfer agent. With a buyer lined up for each before the ink is dry, you're not acquiring Halden Instruments. You're parting it out, and the town outside that window doesn't survive the sale. Your raid only closes with proxies the owner never signed. I've watched them come into this room at 4 o'clock 90 afternoons running. They're in that folder, under Alex's hand. The room was very still, the rain on the glass. Alex had not moved. Marcus. The transfer agent records for the Vance block. Is there a registered authorization for a proxy vote? Finch opened the file I'd asked him to bring and said, flat as a table. There is no authorization on file. The submitted proxy references a notarization number that does not exist in the state registry. I checked it twice. I'd asked him for a number, and he'd brought the one that ended a war. And to close the question, I said, nodding to Zola, who put a call on the room's speakers. Ms. Vance is on the line. Eleanor, did you authorize the proxy being submitted in your fund's name today? I did not, said Eleanor Dubois' careful voice, filling the gray room. And I'm instructing that my block be voted against the acquisition. I did not take my eyes off Malcolm Frost. I had waited 90 mornings to watch this happen to this face. A lot of accusation, Frost said, recovering, and not one shred of proof Corvid submitted anything. Proxies are handled internally, by your own people. Even cornered, he found the knife. By your own second-in-command, in fact. If there's fraud here, Ms. Harding, perhaps look to your right. And there it was, the frame. The same one that had burned Sachi Tanaka 89 times, swung now at Alex to keep me chasing the wrong ghost. On other mornings it had worked, because I hadn't known where the string ran back to. Now I did. I have looked to my right, I said, for 90 mornings. Let me tell you what I found. I turned to Alex Cole, my oldest friend, the one who sat up with me the night Arthur died. The big day, we've got this. His eyes came up already wet because some part of him had known, the second my hand went flat on the table, that this was the morning it finally came apart. You made the same call at 7:14 every morning for 90 days, Alex, I said. I have been standing behind you for every one. He flinched as if the words had weight. I know you delivered the proxies at 4. I know you leaked the poison pill defense in March, and I know why. I said it not to wound him, but because 90 mornings had burned the cruelty out of me and left only the accuracy. Malcolm Frost engineered your debt. He bought the paper on you 8 months ago, piece by piece until he owned it, then came to you with an impossible number and a way out that cost you your soul and everyone in this town. He didn't find a traitor, Alex. He manufactured one. He needed an inside key, so he built the lock around a good man and turned him. That's what he means by his line. I looked back at Frost. Every fortress falls from the inside. You say it like a law of nature, but it isn't nature, Malcolm. It's a method. You don't find the inside, you make it. You find the loyal man with the drowning debt, and you become the water. Well, I found your method, and every hinge you cut. And a fortress that knows exactly where you're standing closes the gate and leaves you outside in the rain. Alex put his hand over his eyes. Lena, he said, wrecked. I was going to. I know. Around the 30th morning, I finally believed you were going to. It doesn't undo it, but you should hear that I know it. I set the folder in front of the chair and opened it, and the forged proxies were exactly where I had known they would be. Evelyn, the proxies are void. The fraud is on the record. The swing block votes against. Call the vote. Chase looked at Frost. Old habit. Then she looked at the window, the gray streets, the lit windows of a company that made its payroll, and for once in her cautious life, decided to be the person the story would need her to have been. She took up the gavel. "The proxies for the Vance block are stricken," she said, her voice only shaking a little. "The chair notes the fraud on the record and refers it to council. We'll proceed to the vote." Frost was on his feet. "Point of order." "Denied," Chase said, and I could have kissed her. "You'll be in litigation for a decade." "Appeal to the chair is denied," she said, reading, I realized, off the sequence I had recited, his moves landing in the order I'd promised, and finding in that the nerve to swat each one down. He had one left. I mouthed it before he said it. "This isn't over," Frost said. It was the weakest thing in his repertoire, and it was all he had. I had taken the rest. They voted. Without the forged block, Corvid could not reach a majority. The acquisition failed, in the room, in real time, with the rain on the glass, and a pension manager still on the speaker, and my oldest friend with his face in his hands. Halden Instruments would not be sold for parts. The town would keep its lights. Frost gathered his folder. On other mornings at this hour, he had reached out to shake my hand as a man who had won. Grade, Malcolm Frost, fail. Loop by loop, every version of you I ever watched, fail. He paused at the door because men like him always need the last word. "You've made an enemy today, Ms. Harding. I made 90 of you and buried them all before breakfast. You're just the one still standing when I ran out of mornings." The door closed, and he was somebody else's problem now. The regulators, the courts, the markets. Then there was only the room emptying out, and the rain, and Alex, still to my right, a man who had run out of somewhere to be. "They'll want a statement," he said. "Yes, you'll cooperate. You'll tell them everything, including what Frost did to corner you, because that part is true, and it matters. It won't save your job. It might eventually save you." I looked at him, really looked, the way you only can at someone you've forgiven in advance across 90 mornings. "I'm not going to destroy you, Alex, but Arthur didn't build a place where we take each other apart for parts. That was the other guy's business." "I did hate you," I said before he could. Around the 50th morning, it didn't take. I stood. There was one call left to make. "Go home, Alex. Start the long few years tonight." I stepped into the corridor and called Sachi Tanaka. She picked up on half a ring. "It's done. You're clear. Your name is nowhere near it and never will be. Come in tomorrow. I've got real work for you, the kind Arthur would have given you." And I heard a young woman start to cry with relief. And it was the best sound I had heard in 90 days, because it was the sound of the one person I had finally refused to lose. Then I stood at the tall window and watched the town come on, light by light, in the wet dark, and waited for 6 o'clock, because I had waited for it 90 times and knew how to do nothing else. I took Arthur's watch from my pocket. Stopped at the top of the dial, the two gold hands holding their breath. The last grade, the one I'd been afraid to write, was my own. Because for 90 mornings, I had made the same choice too, never differently. Save the company, spend the people. The morning had not been waiting for me to win. It had been waiting for me to stop paying in people. Today, I had paid in nothing. I had lost no one. The wall clock crawled towards 6. The old dread rose anyway. The animal certainty that any moment the white flash would take the day back, and I'd wake in the gray light with the watch stopped and Sachi alive to be sacrificed again. I held the watch so hard the case bit my palm. The clock reached 6, and the room did not go white. The second hand moved past 12 and kept going. 6 o'clock became 6:01. The rain kept falling, but it was new rain now, on a minute that had never existed. No flash, no gray light, no reset. Just the town in the window, and my own heart going like something let out of a cage. And then, because my fingers seemed to know before I did, I found the crown and wound it. 1 turn, 2. The tiny resistance of a mechanism still for a year, for the whole frozen length of my grief. And the small gold hands, stopped at 6 o'clock since the day my whole life stopped there, shivered and caught, and began, quietly, impossibly, to move. 6 o'clock came. The gavel fell the other way, and the morning did not take me back. For the first time in 90 days, I had no idea what happened next, and it was the most beautiful thing I have ever felt. Chapter 8. What Comes After 6. Rain still started at 11:40 the next day, I know, because I stood at the window and watched it come, and it kept coming, and the clock kept moving past it, and nothing went white. That was how I learned the loop was truly gone. Not by any grand feeling, by a Thursday I had never seen before. By a puddle widening on the plaza below in a shape I had never memorized because I had never been given the chance. For 90 mornings, the day had been a closed room I walked in circles. Now it was a hallway, and it went somewhere, and I did not know where. I had forgotten a person could feel this, the plain vertigo of not knowing what came next. I stood in it a long time. Then I went to work because there was, at last, a tomorrow to work toward. The unwinding took months, not minutes. Inside the loop, everything happened by 6 o'clock or not at all. Outside it, justice moved the way real things move, slowly, through paper, through rooms of tired people checking each other's arithmetic. I had spent 90 days wanting a gavel. What I got instead was a filing cabinet. Malcolm Frost's raid did not so much fail as dissolve. The forged proxies were the thread, and once you pull the right thread, the whole garment comes apart in your hands. When the vote closed the other way, Corvid Capital was left holding a tender offer built on signatures that did not belong to the people whose names were on them. That is not a business setback. That is a lie told to a regulator, in writing, under seal. Leonard Stone, cleared, and furious in the cold, precise way of a lawyer who has been made to look foolish, walked the forged instruments to the commission himself, with the loop-built dossier reorganized into something a court could hold. I had assembled that dossier across mornings no one else remembered, cross-referencing a proxy delivered at 4 o'clock against a call placed at 7:14, until I could have recited the metadata in my sleep. Outside the loop, it read like the work of an obsessive. It was. It was also true, every line of it, and truth checks out no matter how strangely it was gathered. Corvid had leveraged itself to the edge to swallow Halden. That was Frost's whole method. Borrow enormously against the certainty of a win, strip the acquired company for parts, flip the assets, repay the debt, keep the difference. The certainty was the load-bearing wall. He borrowed as a man borrows who cannot imagine the ground moving. And when the ground moved, when the vote went the wrong way and the forged proxies turned from a weapon into evidence, the fund was suddenly a highly leveraged bet on an outcome that had not happened. The lenders wanted their money. The regulators wanted his files. His own investors, the ones who had trusted the smooth man always one move ahead, wanted to know why he had been outmaneuvered by a chief operating officer nobody had bothered to fear. He came to see me once, near the end. He sat across the desk that used to be Arthur's and told me, in that low, even voice, that I had gotten lucky, that markets are cruel, that I, of all people, should understand that every fortress falls from the inside. It does, I said. I've thought about that line more than you have. You built a whole career on it. Find the one frightened person inside the wall, buy him, and the wall opens itself. I let the silence sit. You were right about the fortress. You were wrong about which one. You spent a year getting inside my walls. You never once thought to check your own. Corvid Capital fell from the inside, from the rot of a scheme that assumed it could not fail. The regulators barred him. The lenders took the fund apart the way he had planned to take apart Halden, methodically, for scrap. Nothing cinematic. The market does not need drama to end a man. It simply stops returning his calls. Malcolm Frost is a name that closes doors now. He raised a fund the following year and could not fill it. I did not need him ruined by my hand. I only needed him to face, in a currency he actually valued, the one arithmetic he had never run. What it costs to be a man no one will trust with anything again. Pass and fail were my private ledger for 90 mornings. His grade was the only one the world came around to sharing. Alex was harder. Alex was always going to be the hard one. I could have destroyed him. I want to be honest about that because the honesty is the whole point. I held 90 days of proof that Alexander Reed, my right hand, the oldest friend I had, the man whose text arrived at 6:02 every single morning, "Big day, we've got this," had forged the proxy and leaked the poison pill defense that let Frost in. I had watched him make that call at 7:14 more times than a person should watch anything. I could have handed the prosecutors the cruelest version of the story and let them build a monster out of a frightened man. I didn't. Not because I had forgiven him, that came later and slower, and it is a different thing, but because I had learned, in the last loops, why the call got made. Frost had not found a villain inside our walls. He had manufactured one. He had engineered Alex's ruin a year in advance, buried him under a debt with 100 quiet hooks in it, and then arrived, smiling, with the one door out. Sell the room that trusts you, or lose everything you love. Alex had chosen wrong. But he had chosen it the way a man chooses the lesser horror at 4 in the morning, not the way a man chooses evil. I had spent 90 mornings certain the mole was a stranger wearing a friend's face. The truth was smaller and worse. He was a friend who had been cornered until the friend nearly disappeared. So I gave the prosecutors the true version, which is neither the cruelest nor the kindest. Alex confessed. He cooperated, fully, without bargaining, which surprised the lawyers and did not surprise me, because the same integrity that made his betrayal unbearable was the thing that made his confession total. He gave them Frost's structure from the inside, the engineered debt, the pressure, all of it. It was Alex's testimony more than my dossier that finished Corvid. There is a symmetry in that I have decided to find almost beautiful. The inside man who opened the gate was also the inside man who nailed it shut behind the raider. He lost his role, of course. He faces the law, and the law will take its measured portion, a real consequence, not a wink. I did not lift a finger to soften the legal weight, because mercy that erases the truth is just another kind of lie, and I was done with those. But I lifted no finger to add to it either, and on the day it was settled, I asked to see him. We sat in a plain room. He looked older, the way the loop had made me look older, except his year had happened all at once. You could have asked me, I said. It was not an accusation, it was the thing I most needed him to hear. Whatever he had on you, whatever the number was, you could have walked into my office and said, Lena, I'm drowning. Arthur built this whole place on people trusting each other on purpose. You were in that room. You were the room, to me. I know, he said. His voice broke on it and then steadied, and I understood that this was the sentence he would be serving long after the legal one ended. Not the loss of the job, not the record. This, the knowledge, permanent and private, that the one room in the world that had trusted him without condition was the room he had sold. No court could impose it, and none could lift it. It was the only punishment that fit, and it had been waiting for him the whole time, the way the right question had been waiting for me. I'm not going to hate you, I said, standing. I tried. It doesn't take. You were the best of us until a man who deals in fear got to you first. I'm sorry I never saw you drowning. I was too busy trying to save the building. That was true, and it was the truest thing I had learned in 90 mornings, and I did not know until I said it out loud that it was also about myself. Marcus Finch, of all people, became the ground I built on. I had spent loops circling him, the obvious suspect, the cold numbers man, the one everybody's instinct fingers first because he does not perform warmth. 90 mornings taught me the thing instinct cannot. Finch was ruthless, and Finch was clean, and those are not the same axis. He would cut a division to save a company without blinking, and he would never forge a signature, because the second was a lie and the first was only math. Once the dust settled, he came into my office and slid a restructuring plan across the desk that would put Halden Instruments on solid ground for a decade. I don't like sentiment, he said. I like solvency. This delivers solvency. He paused, and something almost human crossed his face. You saw it before any of us. I don't know how. I've decided not to ask. He tapped the folder. But I'd rather be right beside you than wrong against you. The math agrees with me. I graded him, silently, one last time. Pass. The unlikeliest one on the ledger. Evelyn Chase's redemption was a smaller thing, and I have made my peace with small things. She had been complicit in cowardice, never in betrayal. The board chair who cared more about the picture than the people in it, who would have let the deal close to avoid the mess of fighting it. But in the meeting, at the hinge of it, when I laid the forged proxies on the table, and the room could have gone either way, Evelyn flinched to the right side. She voted with me. It was not courage exactly, it was a person discovering, one instant before it was too late, that she did not want to be on the record as the one who let it happen. Afterwards, she did the work of atonement quietly, using every ounce of her image-first instinct to sell the town on the rescue instead of the surrender. Cowardice that turns at the last second and then labors to make good is not heroism. But it is not nothing. And Halden Instruments, Arthur's life's work, the thing I had thrown 90 mornings against like a woman throwing herself at a door, Halden Instruments lived. Not just survived, steadied. Finch's restructuring, Pierce's clean legal footing, a board that had looked into the abyss and stepped back, the company came out of it stronger than it went in, the way bone knits thicker at a break. And the town, the whole quiet reason any of it mattered, the streets full of people whose mortgages and Saturdays and children's shoes were tied to whether the lines kept running, the town kept its jobs. No layoffs, no stripping for parts, no smiling man from Corvid arriving to explain how much more efficient everyone's grandfather's factory would be as scrap. I used to lie awake in the loop and see the town going dark, every loop, at 6 o'clock. It is not dark. I drove through it last week and the diner was full and the lights were on and nobody in it will ever know how many times I watched them lose everything. Everyone forgets. I'm the only one who has to remember. I have decided that is a fair trade, if the remembering buys them a morning they get to keep. I gave Sachi Tanaka her office myself. That mattered more than any of it, and it took me the longest time to understand why, so let me be plain about it now. In every loop, every single one, 90 of them, I had used Sachi. She was young and gifted and honest to the bone, a junior analyst who saw the wrong in the numbers and wanted to say so, and every morning I had made her my instrument. I pushed her forward as the whistleblower, the pawn, the one whose name would be attached to the leak so the machine had someone to break. And it broke her. Every loop. Blacklisted, scapegoated, spat out as the leak to cover the real mole, while I told myself it was strategy, it was triage, it was the cost of saving the building. 90 mornings I spent her like a coin. She was young Lena, the same clear eyes, the same dangerous integrity, the same willingness to be spent by someone who called it necessary. I had become the someone. That was the thing the loop was actually about, and I had been too busy fighting the wolf to see it. The 91st morning, I protected her first. Before the swing shareholder, before the dossier, before Frost, before the win, her. And the morning let me go. So when it was over, I did not merely spare her, I raised her. I made her the youngest person to sit in a real seat at Halden, and then I did the thing that is harder than raising someone, which is teaching them, hours of it, the unglamorous transfer of everything I knew about numbers and people and the difference between the two. I told her the things Arthur told me. I did not tell her about the loop, some gifts you give without the receipt, but I told her the one line that was the whole inheritance. A company is just people who decided to trust each other on purpose, I said. That's the only asset that isn't on any sheet. Guard the people. The building takes care of itself. She wrote it down. She is better than I was at her age, and one day she will be sitting behind a desk telling some frightened young analyst the same thing. And that, I understand this now in a way I could not have before, 90 mornings taught me the cost of the alternative. That is what Arthur built. Not instruments. A chain of people passing the same trust forward on purpose, hand to hand, down a line with no end. I had almost broken the chain to save the factory that made it possible. You cannot do that. The chain is the thing. The factory is just where they keep it. We named the main lab for him. Arthur Sterling's name is on the atrium now, cut into the stone above the doors he used to hold open for the night shift because he liked to know their names. Zola Mensa organized the whole dedication because of course she did, Zola, who had started to notice in the loop's last mornings that I knew things before they happened, and who never once demanded I explain, and who simply became my right hand inside the building because she decided to trust me on purpose. She gripped my arm when the cloth came off the plaque and she said, "He'd have hated the fuss." And I said, "He'd have loved it and pretended to hate it." And she laughed because that was exactly right. And it is a rare and holy thing to stand next to someone who knew the same dead man you did. I have not said enough about the watch. I should end there because that is where the loop ended. Arthur's pocket watch had stopped at 6 o'clock. It stopped, I always believed, at the moment he died, though I have never been able to prove it and have stopped needing to. I had carried it through all 90 mornings, frozen, a small dead weight of 6 o'clock in my pocket, the same 6 o'clock the world reset to, as if his death and my prison were the same wound wearing two faces. I never wound it. I think I believed I did not have the right. We had not reconciled before he died. I had been climbing, and I had pushed him, ambitious and impatient, and I had told myself there would be time, and then there was no time, and then, cruelly, there was nothing but time. The same day forever, and none of it his. The night after the dedication, I sat alone in the atrium under his name, and I took the watch out and I forgave him. Not for anything, exactly. For being human, and slow to praise me, and gone before I could tell him he had been right about people, and I had been wrong. And then, which was harder, I forgave myself, for the climbing, for the pushing, for 90 mornings of spending people I loved because I had confused saving the thing Arthur built with betraying the reason he built it. Forgiveness is not a feeling that arrives. It is a decision you make and then keep making. And I wound the watch. It resisted, the way a mechanism resists after a long stillness. Then the crown turned, and I felt the mainspring take, that faint living tension, and I held my breath the way I had held it at the meeting when the vote turned. I set it down on my knee, and it ticked. It ticked, and then it ticked again, and then it simply kept going, the way time is supposed to, indifferent and forward and free. And I sat in the dark under my mentor's name and listened to the loop's own token come back to life in my hand. And I understood, finally and completely, that the day had never been holding me. I had been holding the day. It let go the instant I did. Ethan found me there. He always seemed to know where to find me, which is its own kind of foreknowledge. He sat down on the cold stone without a word, the way he did everything, steadily, without needing to be asked. I had told him the truth about the loop back when no one on earth could have believed it, when it sounded like the confession of a woman coming apart. And he had listened, and I had proved it the only way I could, by predicting the next 60 seconds of the world down to the rain. And he had gone very quiet, and then said, "All right." Just that. All right. As if I had told him something difficult but ordinary. As if trust were a thing you could simply decide to extend, on purpose. "You told me the truth," he said now, "when no one could have believed you." He looked at the watch ticking on my knee. "I believed you." That is the whole of it. That is the only love story I have the right to tell, because it is the only one that is true. He believed me when belief cost him something and bought him nothing. And I let him close when letting people close was the one thing 90 mornings had trained out of me. I had spent the loop treating everyone as a piece on a board. He was the first person I chose to treat as a person, and lost nothing by it. Gained, in fact, the only thing worth gaining. We are not loud about it. We are two tired people who have seen the same abyss from opposite sides of a table and decided to sit on the same side now. It is enough. It is, I have found, everything. I have thought a great deal about why the morning let me go. For 90 mornings, I ask the wrong question. How do I win? How do I save it? How do I move the pieces so the gavel falls the other way? I ran the day like a machine, looking for the input that produces the output. And the machine gave me the same white flash every time, patient as a law of physics, because it was never that kind of machine, and it was never asking that kind of question. It was never about the company. That is the thing I would carry back and tell the woman at the window on the 90th morning if the hallway ran backward, which it does not, which is the mercy. The loop did not release when I saved Halden Instruments. I had saved it, in 100 clever, doomed ways, and been thrown back every time. It released the instant I stopped treating people as pieces and chose a person over the win. It released when I protected Sachi before I protected the building. When I refused to spend the one soul I had spent 90 times. When I forgave Arthur and myself and wound the watch. The morning was not a lock I had to pick. It was a mirror I had to finally look into. And what it was waiting for me to see was not a strategy. It was a choice, the human one. The one that costs you the win and hands you your life. You find out who someone really is when you've watched them make the same choice 100 times, and they never once make it differently. I used to say that about the villains. I built a whole ledger on it, pass and fail, grading every soul in the building across mornings no one else remembers. I never once turned the sentence on myself. I should have. Because I was the one making the same choice 90 mornings running, save the company, spend the people, and never once, not one single time, differently. The morning only let me go when I finally chose the other way. Time moves forward now. I don't know what happens next. So am I. Pass.